evening, everyone. Welcome to the Board of Directors meeting for June 5th, 2018. I'd like to welcome a full house that we have with us this evening for all sorts of work that we've got to conduct this evening. So first things first, let me ask the city clerk to read the roll.
Director Hendricks, Director Richardson, Director Peck, Director Hines, Director Wright, Director Wyrick, Director Compuris, Director Fortson, Director Adcock, Vice Mayor Webb, Mayor Stodler.
Here. Let me call on Vice Mayor Kathy Webb for our invocation, please.
Please join me in We ask for the wisdom to govern amid the conflicting interests and issues of our times. We ask for understanding of the true needs of our people, for a keen thirst for justice and rightness, for the confidence that what we are doing is good and fitting. We ask for the ability to work together in harmony, even when there is honest disagreement. And we ask for personal peace in the lives of those who are here, and peace and healing in the lives of all in our city. Amen.
Amen. If you would, please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, the first thing we have is a presentation to deal with a program that we've had now for the last few years called Working in the Community, dealing with teaching our Arkansas driving laws in Spanish to our Hispanic-speaking neighbors. And let me call on City Director Joan Adcock for the workup of this. If you would, Director Adcock.
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight we have Sergeant Jacob Tobler and, of course, our Chief Buckner with us. And Mayor, if you'll go down front too, please. And we have, I think, around 30 of our citizens, of our residents that are here to receive their certificates. They all completed the driving laws in Spanish class, and they're here tonight to receive a certificate. Mr. Moore, would you join them, please?
Members of the board, Mayor, and citizens of Little Rock, I'm pleased to come before you and present these participants in our driver safety and traffic law class in Spanish. We have a number of participants who have come here to receive their certificates this evening, and I'm going to read them off, and they're going to come in from the hallway so they can be recognized and receive their certificates.
Would you three gentlemen stand over here so they can shake your hands, please?
On your tippy toes.
Thank you.
Beata Enriquez Hernandez. Berta Santos. Carlos.
Just stay.
Okay.
They told him to go.
Maricela, will you tell them that we're going to do a picture afterwards so not leave?
Yeah, let him come on inside the door.
Carlos Gonzalez Martinez. Carolina Lopez. Graciela Ramirez. Maria Arellano. María de Lourdes González Gutiérrez. Okay. Mercedes Urbina. You're welcome. Neri Barrientos.
Hey.
Norma Jaimes Mancilla. Oscar M. Garcia. Rafael Vargas. Raimundo Urbina. Rina Esteves Rodriguez. Y Lorenzo Ponce de Paz. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You know, sometimes we don't understand why it's so important to these individuals, but in the countries that they come from, they would never come to a city hall or a place of government. And that's why we invite them up here, because we want them to learn to feel comfortable as residents of our city. Thank you all so much for making them welcome tonight.
And thank you, Director Adcock, and thanks to our police department for the work they do in reaching out to our Hispanic community. It is a very important effort that we do, and it certainly embraces the diversity of our community and the great mosaic that we have in our community as it relates to various types of ethnicities that we have. And certainly it helps in terms of trust in terms of our police department as well. When we have issues, we need to count on people who can communicate to us and trust our police department. So thank you all very much, and it's a great program. We got one other presentation. We have a housing study update that is going to be presented to us, and I'm not sure who is going to be. Alita Anthony, are you going to be the one presenting? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
You
I'm
bet.
also going to call upon Neil Seeley and Amy Pritchard to also participate in this presentation. Mr. Mayor, members of the board, thank you for allowing us to come back and give you an update, and thank you for affording us a full house tonight in the arrangement of the agenda. So we would make sure that we had so many citizens that could hear about this great report. We came about a year ago to tell you of a preliminary report that we were putting together to show the link between housing and health. And that's very important in a diverse, growing community such as Little Rock. We knew, but the fact shows that from this report that there is truly a link between good housing and health. We want to thank the members of the departments of the City of Little Rock, Code Enforcement, and the IT department who gave us a lot of great support, and Mr. Mayor, you and the Invest Health organization who were also a big part of the gathering of this data. At this time, I know you've got a heavy agenda, so I'm going to call upon Neil Seeley to tell you a little bit about the report along with Amy Pritchard.
Okay, so should we, well, thank you for having us. We came to you, I think, about a year ago and gave you an idea of what we were doing. We were conducting a health impact assessment to study the link between housing and health, and to study how Arkansas's lack of a warranty of habitability affects people living in neighborhoods south of I-630. We do have a PowerPoint. It's a little bit long, so I'd like to go to slide 11 if we could, and just sort of update you on our findings. Okay, so we want to tell you about what we did. It was the first thing that we did was to actually have focus groups. And so we had those over the summer of 2016 through the fall of 2016. And we had different stakeholders. We had renters from different parts of the city, people who were justice involved, talking about their issues with housing. We had a veterans focus group, and we also had a landlord focus group and city agencies and other agencies focus group. So in total, we talked to about 38 renters and 34 stakeholders in those focus groups. And so here's what we learned, and here were some common themes. So next slide, please. So we found, particularly among the renter population, that there was a lack of awareness of Arkansas's landlord-tenant laws. Many of the renters spoke about living in conditions that were inhospitable, unsanitary, and unsafe. And many renters also spoke about health issues that they had. And so that kind of tells us that housing is a key social determinant of health. Next slide, please. Then we found that there were several barriers to trust, both among landlords and tenants. Landlords complained about what tenants do and how they don't keep up their apartments, and tenants spoke about many different issues. Amongst the justice-involved population, there was a strong complaint of how difficult it is to find housing and how much they had to pay in non-refundable application fees. The Hispanic group that we interviewed spoke about language barriers. Many landlords don't speak Spanish, and many of the tenants don't understand English. And so there was a language barrier. And then many people said that they were afraid of calling for housing inspection when they lived in or had problems with their landlord. The majority of the stakeholders said that Arkansas laws are unfair and unjust. And this was amongst both landlords, renters, and people in agencies that we spoke with. Also, renters and stakeholders were in agreement and made these recommendations that there needs to be more education for tenants and landlords about code enforcement and Arkansas laws, that there needs to be an enhancement of code enforcement, and a greater expansion of health and housing collaboration, such as what we have in Children's Hospital. And so that was a common themes. So the next thing that we did was we did a survey. And so we partnered with a class with the College of Public Health. And so the class did interviews of individual tenants. And yeah, next slide. I'm sorry, next slide. Yeah. And so that collaboration was a big part of our study and a very valuable part of our study. Next slide, please. We did 976 surveys, and they were primarily gotten through our free tax sites. And the results of the survey showed that 61% indicated that they were current renters. And the first question the survey asked, have you ever rented in Arkansas? And of those 61%, 51% reported that they had had problems with their housing. 23% reported that they had problems with the landlord fixing up. And 7% reported that they had health issues. and 83% reported that they would support changes in Arkansas's landlord-tenant laws. Next slide, please. And the students completed 26 interviews with, and in our survey, we asked people if they would be willing to be interviewed by someone about their experiences renting in Arkansas. And from these interviews, we heard various problems reported, such as mildew, pests, and other concerns that renters experienced. Next slide. And then people also were asked about how did these conditions affect you? And some of the self-reported health impacts were many psychological, that included embarrassment, increased stress, and some reported respiratory problems and allergies as well. Next slide, please. They also talked about the landlord relationship, and some of the renters reported that landlords ignored requests for repairs. Landlords made partial fixes. Renters felt discriminated against, and there were a lot of problems with management companies with turnover in managers. And the next slide, please. The students also interviewed code enforcement officers, and those interviews were very interesting, and some of the results were code enforcement officers reported that they were in the job because they wanted to help other people. They reported many of the problems that renters reported in the condition of their housing. Most supported rental inspection, but believe the program is understaffed. And there was also reported a lot of variations in the part of town that you worked in. So code enforcement officers who worked in West Little Rock reported fewer violations than those who worked in neighborhoods south of I-630, which was our target study area. Next slide, please. And the next sort of findings that we got from interviews with code enforcement officers were that they reported problems both with tenants and landlords in the condition of the housing. They said that tenants did bear some responsibility for conditions, and most acknowledged, though, that the laws were slanted in favor of landlords. And next slide, and sort of the final sort of reports from those interviews, many said that the codes needed to be updated and simplified. They said existing codes were too lenient. They felt that their job was under a microscope and that they did not have the freedom to do what they needed to do to get housing fixed up and up to standard. And they felt that there needs to be better education to the public about what code enforcement is and what code officers do. And all right, and I think next slide, please. And we can go to the next one. Let's see. And there were some potential reforms that were recommended. They said that there were weak legal sanctions. They said re-inspections were time-consuming, and they were concerned about the turnover and the salaries. Next slide. So the last part of our study consisted of a project, and we actually contracted with the UAMS College of Public Health, and it was a collaboration between 311 and code enforcement and the College of Public Health. We got UAMS discharge data. And so we put the two data sets together and tried to find out, is there some could we find some sort of link between respiratory problems and those issues that codes reported that could lead to respiratory problems, such as mold and the kinds of things that could cause mold. And we found, the end result was that we found that someone discharged from UAMS with a respiratory issue from a residents that had reported one of these problems were 2 times more likely to have a respiratory issue. I think that's how, is that correct? Yeah, I think that's how. And next slide. And sort of the other finding that we found is we, as part of our project, did a stakeholder meeting, and we assessed House Bill 1166, which was legislation introduced in 2017 against the Uniform Residential Landlord-Tenant Law. And we found that the latter had much stronger protections for tenants and a much more positive impact on health. And next slide. And those are our summary findings. And next slide. These are some pictures from city codes that shows you some of the problems. Next slide. And next slide. Next slide. Okay, and so we'll turn it over to you.
So I'm just going to talk to you briefly about the recommendations that came from both the focus groups, the surveys, and our conversation as a steering committee. And I'm going to really focus on what can be done at a local level. We've looked at recommendations at a statewide level, and these are both outlined in the report we've given you. The big thing that needs to be done is education, both of landlords and tenants, on in Little Rock has a rental inspection ordinance that provides certain protections. And a lot of tenants don't know about that, and a lot of landlords don't know about that. We found a lot of landlords who didn't know that they need to be licensed and get a certificate of compliance before renting their units. We found a lot of tenants didn't know that they have the right to request that and that the place needs to be kept up to that certificate of compliance. So at the local level, we recommended more education, and we do that both. I'm at the law school, so we do some education. Legal Services does some of that. A lot of our partners do some of that, but also from city agencies, educating both landlords and tenants on their rights and their responsibilities. Because if tenants understand what they need to do to keep a unit safe and sanitary, and landlords understand what their responsibility is to keep the unit safe and sanitary, we feel like that they're working together will make more units livable and healthy. Next slide, please. And then we looked at how to strengthen housing policies. So obviously statewide, there are a lot of us that are talking about minimum standards statewide and creating a law that creates some sort of implied warranty of habitability. But at the local level as well, we have this minimum standard that's created by the rental inspection ordinance. And we thought that in order to strengthen what already exists in Little Rock, we really need to have something that prohibits landlords from retaliating against tenants who report to code inspection. Because right now, a lot of tenants told us they were afraid to call code because they were going to get evicted, and there's no protection in the law currently. Also, at the local level, we thought that special care in whatever ordinance was created needed to be paid to rent-to-own situations where tenants are purchasing the home but also acting somewhat as tenants, and mobile home parks and mobile trailers. Also, we thought at the local level there could be some attention paid to the use of criminal records in screening for tenancy. Right now, a lot of tenants can't get rent a place to live because they have some sort of criminal record. And we talked to a lot of tenants who were living in substandard housing and were very vulnerable because if they reported any of the conditions and had to move out of that unit, they could lose their status and actually be revoked on their parole or probation because they didn't have a place to live. So that gave the landlords a lot of control over them, and we recommended looking at ways that the city could kind of ban the box on a rental arrangement. Next slide. We also looked at ways that the current rental inspection ordinance could be strengthened. Right now, that the pieces are in place. It says that it's not lawful to rent in Arkansas, in Little Rock, unless it's been inspected. But the tenants have no independent way to enforce that. And if we gave the tenants some power to actually, some sort of mechanism where they could enforce that, either by creating some sort of registry where they could pay into the registry of the court if an environmental proceeding was going on, something where they could also put pressure on the landlords to make those repairs while feeling safe doing that. One big thing we heard a lot about code enforcement is there aren't many dedicated code enforcement officers working on enforcing the rental inspection ordinance. The ordinance really would make a difference if there was a dedicated staff going out there and systematically making these inspections. Even we heard, I guess last year, landlords talking about there were a couple of landlords got notices that these inspections were going to be made, and even that created kind of this heightened awareness that they had to start making repairs and looking at making conditions better. And our final recommendation is just, you have a lot of data that you shared with us, which was great, but creating more data that's electronic and easily accessible so that code enforcement's putting everything into a database that we could look at who the landlords are, who the tenants are, where their problem properties, and compare and see who actually is having the greatest impact on these poor and unsanitary housing conditions.
I think that's it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. Yeah.
There may be a couple of questions or comments.
Okay. Great.
First of all, Neil, will this final report be provided to all of us?
Yeah, so you should have a written copy.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I've got to
Yeah.
apologize, I've got it stacked up in front of all these cards of people who want to speak to
Oh,
me.
yeah.
They're on top of it, okay, good, thank you.
Yeah.
Let's see, Director Hendricks, you're first, please.
No.
Okay, Director Wright, you're next, please.
Yes, sir. Seems like we've been talking about this since the 90s, Lita.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't seem like we're getting anywhere. And I have been sorely frustrated, and I think you know that over the years about this. I have a lot of single-family rentals as well as the multifamily, but I have more issues with single-family rental. Now, so I guess my comments are basically for the city manager and his staff, because I'm reading here on page 33 where it says, this is after you all interviewed the code officers, it said codes need to be updated and simplified, fines should be higher, and the way to improve renters' conditions is to hold the owner's feet to the fire. If they had to fix their property or risk losing it, many of the problems would go away. Now, of course, you know Arkansas has really strong property rights, very strong. However, my question, Mr. Moore, is, or the city attorney, what can we do to update our existing codes that our code enforcement officers are having to enforce every day? Is that something within our preview, or is that something that we have to go by state statute on, or can we make changes to that?
Director Wright, you have updated your codes. You've passed new additions to them this year. I'm looking for Mr. Givens. He was around here earlier. But those basic fire codes, safety codes, building codes and such are updated periodically.
So, but those are according to state statute, or is those or according to national standards?
I think that they are regional standards. I'm not sure. The state statute gives the board of directors the authority to adopt them by reference, and that's what you do.
Okay, so now my question comes back to you all. did these officers, were they in any way specific as to what they meant codes needs to be updated and simplified? Did they break that down so that we could get an understanding of what they want to see changed?
Part of what we saw, Director Wright, and I think this was the bigger problem, that at the time of this report, there were only 5 code enforcement individuals who were responsible for inspections.
Rental or
Rental.
inspections, period?
Rental inspections. There was only 5 of the 36 or 38 that's on the roll today. And the time that it takes, you know, you go out and you do the complaint, then within 30 days you got to go back, and then within another 30 days. So as a course of what takes place, and that big piece being updated, they may only get 50 to 100 inspections done in a year. And that's well below what the 1,200 that should have been a part of the ordinance.
Okay, and Mr. Moore, according to our policy, is there any way to expedite that process, or is that state statute, so forth?
Well, one of the things that we have looked at a lot over the years is we have the ordinance says that we have to inspect every rental property every 2 years. Well, that's just
It's impossible?
It's impossible. And what I've tried to come up with, and we've worked with some community groups and neighborhood groups, is, you know, when you have a new apartment complex come online in 2018, it really doesn't need to go into your rental inspection program.
Exactly.
And so we've been trying to come up with a standard that everyone can accept, where we really focus on the problem properties. But right now we aren't in compliance with the ordinance. One of the things, and I was talking with the whole group of code officers about 2 weeks ago, a lot of it is that notice issue where you have to give notice and then you've got to go back in 7 to 10 days, and if it's not corrected, then you go get a citation to come to environmental court. And so that's frustrating. And then once we get to environmental court, we tend to, even if they're not making progress, we give some additional time to report back. And so that's one of our biggest challenges, one of our biggest frustrations.
So have we inquired of our staff what would help them to get this job done? And I understand the constraints. You know, we've been dealing with this a while, and we keep getting caught up into these notifications that we are mandated to give because of strong property
right,
rights.
if you remember what we did, I don't know, 10 years ago, we said at the beginning of the year we're going to put one notice in the Democrat Gazette and said you must comply with code and our housing rules. And that's what we were doing until somebody in Tom's office said, well, no, you've got to give a notice every time there's a violation. And we tried to change some language at the Capitol, and it, as Tom and you have said, you know, property rights is a major issue in Arkansas, and it was really DOA once we even came out with it.
And for the audience to understand what that means is most of these counties, small towns around Arkansas, they don't want us to pass what's going to be beneficial to Little Rock because they feel like it's going to hinder the local area that they represent. So they're not dealing with the issues that we're dealing with in Little Rock. So when it comes down to passing something at the state level, that's where we run into this brick wall. So I would have loved to seen in here, and it may be here, and I just got to keep digging through it, where you can come up with 10 things that we can do within our jurisdiction to make this better. Because I live in an area with rental property. I see these houses every day. I passed down Barrow Road, and I called Mr. Moore on my cell one day, and I said, look, I just passed by 5 houses in a row with for rent signs on them, and you could tell just looking at the exterior that they weren't up to code. So I'm like, why are we allowing these houses to be rent? Have they been inspected? And I'll be perfectly frank, Mr. Moore, you said you were going to take a look, but I never got any response back, and I still see a couple of them have been rented, but 3 of them are still vacant, and they still look horrible.
While our report was dealing south of I-30, I think it's the consciousness you should note that the problem is now north of I-630 because of the apartments that are aging, and that now it's becoming a major problem north. One of the things that we did recommend to the mayor and to others in a couple of meetings is that we could have a series of gold star. Folks, we've never had problems, and of course, you could adjust the time when you actually go and inspect them because they have a history of taking care of their property. But there has to be some adjustments as more apartments are going up every day. More property is being rented because several people who are in transitional circumstances can no longer afford to buy. So it's something that we want to be at the table to have the discussion, to make some recommendation, because this is a situation where there is solutions. We say to ourselves, the only thing that keeps us from reaching a solution is having a want-to attitude. So if we want this problem solved, if we come to the table, we can solve it.
Well, I would be amenable to letting you all help us solve it because you're on the ground. I see what you see, but my hands are tied. I don't want to look out of my front door and see a house that's looking like that, and knowing that people are living there and they're living in those conditions. And I don't see what's going on inside of the multifamily, but I see all of the mess going on at the single family. And I've got a lot of that. They're 2-bedroom, 1-bath houses. People move in and out of them and got stuff piled all on the sidewalk that stays there 30 days. You've heard me complain about that over and over. We're getting processes in place to get that stuff quickly, but the problem remains because the substandard rental property. That's what's driving it. Any solution that you have that you can give me, I would be more than happy to entertain, and I will do whatever I can to get it implemented because I want to see this change.
Oh, go ahead.
Director Wright, we did, everything I talked about were the recommendations at the local level, and we fleshed those out at the report. So we made recommendations at the state level, but we can change the ordinances here to really empower tenants to enforce that and make it a stronger ordinance. So that's all spelled out in the report.
Can we do that, Mr. Carpenter? That's because what I'm reading here, what you all were recommending, I don't think we can do.
I don't understand, and I'm not doubting what you found, but if you can dial 311 and make a complaint because the ordinance on rental inspection has not only the periodic inspections, but a complaint-driven situation, why can't that be done now?
Primarily because of the threat of eviction. And in too many instances, an individual, if I report it, we documented, and so did Channel 7 document where people made a complaint, and before they could get back to the house, they were locked out of their property, being evicted. So that's a major, major piece that we have not operated with, is the protection of the tenant when they actually make the complaint.
One thing that might assist with that for members of the board is that the only way that a landlord would know using our 311 that a tenant complained would be if they FOI'd the call. Unfortunately, in Arkansas, if you FOI even somebody saying my neighbor next door is selling drugs and I'm afraid of him, we have to turn that over if it's asked for, and the Attorney General has upheld that. So if you had an FOI that would allow the complaint to be made and the name not to be given, that would help. But then, other than that, under state law, it's pretty broad about, there's really not much we can do in terms of retaliation. We can testify. I will mention that y'all are all under a potential class action suit to throw out rental inspection right now completely. And we're in one case where our inspection efforts ended up getting us sued. So we're fighting both of those battles.
Now, independent legal remedies, what do you mean by that? You said Little Rock could optimize the health promoting potential on its local ordinances by adding independent legal remedies. What does that mean?
Having some sort of mechanism by which tenants could also enforce it. And, I'm sorry?
Something like an ombudsman
Yes,
program.
or just a way that they could make an individual report where they could put money into a register or withhold money or do something that's going to put more pressure on the landlord than calling, having this inspection process starting, going through environmental court, months going on where the tenant's still waiting for these repairs to be made.
And that's possible, Ms. Carpenter?
I don't fully understand the concept of the registry, but anything that will be faster than what's going on in district court would help.
And I can share with Mr. Carpenter some of the sample language from other places, and he could look at it under Arkansas law.
Well, in respect of time, I'm going to end there, but trust me, I heard you, and I'm going to read this a little bit closer. And if can I reach out to you and get some, okay, thank you.
Love to meet with you.
Thank you.
This is an issue that they've spent over a year on, and so we're not going to solve it tonight. I will caution my colleagues that I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 people want to comment on this, and I've got about 50 cards here of people that want to speak tonight. So I'm happy to be here all night long, but I'm giving you all a little notice that the way we're going right now, we're going to be here, okay? Which doesn't bother me. I just want everybody to know we're going to be here, have a nice leisurely time. I do have a question. Did you do any research on the issue of our ordinances and the number of citations that were issued?
Yeah, we can get that. I think Jim Lynch was part of our committee.
Well, did you do then any follow-up information on the number of citations issued versus the number of rental inspections, and then what kind of resolution came out of the courts? One of our frustrations is that obviously we can do all we want to do with our codes. We know that an ordinance violation carries up to $1,000 fine, and I would be highly surprised if you find anybody who was cited that received any type of a really substantial fine, and whether or not those fines were ever collected. So I do think there's an element there from a local standpoint of how do we try and get our courts to be more vigilant in making and holding people accountable for these violations.
We're going to refer you to page 41, where there's a list of the rental inspections, the citations, and those that refer to the courts. It's on page 41 of the report.
Did you do any observation on what kind of consequences were resulted from those citations? How many were found guilty? How many were not found guilty? What kind of penalties were done?
No,
We didn't.
I think that would be very illustrative for us.
Okay, we can.
Very good. Okay, Director Adcock, you're next, please.
Could you tell me what percentages of the inspections that you did? The questionnaires, it was mobile homes, apartments, or single families? Was any mobile homes looked into, that mobile home parks?
yes.
We definitely spoke to people who owned mobile homes, but I couldn't tell you the percentage, especially some of the Hispanic focus groups that we had. Those were mainly mobile home owners or renters.
Okay. And did you do any type of conversation with the environmental judge?
No.
No.
Judge Levitt?
But that's what, in so many cases I've found, is that that's where the problem starts, is when it goes 60 days, 60 days, 60 days, 60 days. And also, did you look at the court cases that the city of Little Rock has had on closing down apartment complexes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so that is covered in the report. Okay, thank you.
Director Richardson, you're next, please.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just one quick question or an assumption that the fewer complaints in West Little Rock probably had a lower percentage of rent-occupied homes. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think the assessment comes with what people can afford.
Got you.
People live in conditions sometimes because that's what they can afford. And that's the thing that we really want to impress upon when you're changing policies and making directions for, that you consider that whatever the condition of that neighborhood is, it is what that community can afford.
That's a perfect segue to the only point I'm going to make, Mayor. I think we need to look at mayor, city manager, and staff, and board. We need to look at home ownership initiatives, ways to figure out ways to secure, identify resources to commit to home ownership. Because, Mayor, I asked you a question. I asked everybody else in the audience, last time anyone got an oil change on a rent-a-car? Raise your hand. When's the last time anyone took a rent-a-car to a detail shop? Raise your hand. You don't own it. So, Bruce, Mayor, guys, I would encourage us to look at pushing for initiative, identifying resources, and committing resources to home ownership, because a lot of our revitalization efforts are centered in areas where, you can clap, Neil, are centered in areas where we have a lot of community disintegration, we have low home ownership rates, and that lends to, and I suspect a lot of these homes we're going to condemn tonight probably had a long-term renter occupied rate, a long-term renter occupied, and we're going to see it. And periodically, they come before us for condemnation and demolition, and for the most part, if you do a thorough assessment, they were long-term renter occupied homes. So I would encourage us to push for that.
And I would add that we do need to put more resources into housing counseling and credit counseling to get people ready for home ownership. And we also have a program called TNEP that is, to my knowledge, not funded and could target areas for revitalization.
Sure. That's it for me, Mayor. I just want us to look at home ownership. We can expect them forever, but we need to push for ways to encourage people to own these homes that they're occupying.
Director Wyrick, you're next, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to thank you all for bringing this information to us. I appreciate the report that you gave us, and I'll spend some time on looking through it. As a comment to Mr. Moore, when I look at the maps that they have in here talking about housing code complaints and asthma prevalent for less than 18 years old, these are the same areas that you and I drove through in Southwest Little Rock off of Chico Road, and we saw all the code violations. And so here we have 3 issues with rental property. The first one's the code enforcement. The second one is the number of crimes that are committed in these areas where we have these locations, and now we have a health problem. So we have 3 issues that are very serious in the areas that we have rental property. Do we have a database that shows where the rental properties are now?
We do.
Okay. So were you able to look at that database for this report? Because I know you said something about that you wanted a database to show rental properties. Do y'all have access to that?
We had access to the 311 database.
Okay.
Okay.
And that was our part of our study, linking hospital discharge data to code violations.
Okay, so where's the database that has the rental property in it?
It's housed in Treasury Management, and I'm going to ask somebody to look up, but I think it might even be on the open data portal right now.
Well, when we went on that tour, I asked for the rental properties in that area, and I never got a report on that. That's the reason why I'm asking the questions. Because, like I said, we have 3 issues with rental property, and it'd be great if we could home in and clear up all the issues at one time. And they're all serious issues. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, we do not want to leave this body with a taste in your mouth that all landlords and property managers are bad. They are not.
Yep.
There are some fantastic landlords out there who are superb in the manner in which they help the tenants keep the property up. So we did not want to leave this meeting. There's a tenant problem in some instances, and there's a landlord issue in some instances. But we did not want to leave this meeting with landlords and property managers thinking this was a beat up on them, because there are some fantastic ones in our city who do a great job of maintaining their properties for their renters.
Director Campuris, you're next, please.
Truly quick question. Bruce, before we had a problem with the number of code officers, can you tell us where we stand right now?
Sure, we have 38 positions and 37 of them are filled.
Director Hendricks, you're next, please.
I wanted to ask Mr. Carpenter, he mentioned about what they're discussing with us is really under the jurisdiction of the state. Is that right? What can we do?
Some of the issues are, yes.
I just wanted to remind the board that we went before the state legislature with regard to landlords and their properties, but some of the legislators walked out of the room. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's a hard thing to crack, I can tell you.
When you're looking at the health of a community, certainly if there's going to be a door opener, it should be the health, because you're going to spend money one way or another. As a part of our work, we're trying to reseat the table, because we did find landlords and property management companies who wanted to have another conversation. We admit there's a strong lobbyist that hits the state when this comes up. But hopefully, we were not here for a political movement with this report, but we did want to arm the policymakers with information you could use. But I can assure you that we're also educating renters as we move forward. We are bringing up a website where renters can also go there to get tips and understanding, a checkoff list of what they need to look for when they're renting property. So this is work that continues to go on.
Director Hendricks, if I may, I can also tell you that if it looks like it's a Little Rock bill, you get into real trouble out of the General Assembly. But my colleagues from areas like Fayetteville and Fort Smith and West Memphis and Texarkana and Jonesboro are having these problems also. So one thing that probably needs to be done if we're going to make a legislative push in 2019 is to take a report like this and not only share it with this board, but share it with the governing bodies of those cities and say, we need your help.
All right, very good. Thank you.
Again, thank you.
Okay, I believe there was a point of personal privilege that Director Campiers wished to bring up at this point.
Mayor and Board, I noticed at the end of our agenda, we're going to executive session to make appointments. I'd like to include on that an assessment of the city manager.
So we'll just add that to our issue of going into executive session without objection. There was some discussion about doing that next week, but a couple of people are going to be out, so hopefully we'll be able to get to it this evening. Thank you. Was that a motion to add that? Is there a second?
I have a question.
Discussion.
Yeah.
Director Hendricks. Director Campiers asked that we include in the executive session for boards and appointments a review of the city manager as we are typical to do.
On our agenda to go in executive session to do boards and commissions. We're in June now. Next week, 2 of us are going to be gone and BJ's going to leave early. And it will go on all summer before we do the assessment. We're 10 of 11 are here tonight, and I move we do it tonight.
And there is a second to that discussion. Director Hendricks.
Oh, I just want to let the members know what we're talking about. We know what we're talking about.
Everybody knows now.
Would you explain that to them? We're just getting ready to interview Mr. Moore for his job. 6 months.
I think they all know. Thank you.
After I open my mouth, you're right.
All right, all in favor of adding that review to the executive session indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. It will be added. The motion passed. Board members, you'll note that as we've been here for an hour, I continue to get cards being added to people who wish to speak on certain items. I'm certainly happy to recognize all of these folks, but I will remind you in North Little Rock, if people are not here by 6 o'clock in their board meeting and signed up, they don't get to speak. So we have gotten about 15 cards since we started this meeting of people who wanted to continue to speak this evening. So I'm not suggesting necessarily that we have a rule like that, but this may be an unusual night. Probably is. But certainly, if anybody has a desire to speak on an item, get your card up here right now because we're going to have to cut this off sooner or later. All right, very good. Director Richardson, do you have
Got me turned on? Yeah, Mayor, I hear what you're saying, and there's a big assumption that we start at 6 every time, but we have people lined up in the hallway. We had one presentation with a number of people present for. I think we have a couple items. So not everyone who wants to participate in the meeting is in here right now. There are people in the hallway right now. So I don't have a desire to be here all night, and I understand what you're saying, but I don't know if we're gonna just unilaterally make a rule right on the spot without taking a vote on it.
I didn't suggest that.
I know,
didn't
I
suggest
understand
that.
what you're saying. I just think we need to be fair and just to everybody. I have no desire being here all night, but I think for us to just kind
That's
of.
probably as much for you and the other board members in terms of
Sure.
comments
I
as it
understand.
is for anyone else. Okay, we can now move on to the consent agenda. Let me ask that we remove item 6. We have a card that wishes to speak against that item. And Madam Clerk, if you would, please read the consent agenda.
The consent agenda consists of a motion to approve the minutes of the April 3rd, 2018 Little Rock City Board of Directors meeting, a resolution authorizing the city manager to execute a contract with Lumatech Incorporated in an amount not to exceed $68,544 for the purchase of LED light fixtures to upgrade the light fixtures along Interstate 630, and for the purposes, a resolution authorizing the city attorney to use eminent domain on the Chateau Lane improvement project and for other purposes, funding from the 2012 through 8-cent capital improvement sales tax. A resolution authorizes the city manager to award a contract to J-Con Construction Incorporated in an amount not to exceed $440,976 for the Wakefield Community Sidewalks project and for the purposes, funding from the 2012 through 8-cent capital improvement sales tax. A resolution authorizes the city manager to award a contract to Burkhalter Technologies Incorporated in an amount not to exceed $744,586.80 for the Whitmore Circle Street and drainage improvements and for other purposes, funding from the 2012 through 8-cent capital improvement sales tax. A resolution authorizes the city manager to allocate an additional $55,000 in contingency funds to complete a contract with Morris Beck Construction Services for a total amount not to exceed $1,552,883.05 for the renovation of the HVAC system and exterior porches of the U.S. Arsenal Building located in MacArthur Park and for other purposes. A resolution authorizes the city manager to execute a contract with Casco Industries Incorporated for the total amount of $125,075 for the purchase of 25 thermal imaging cameras for the Little Rock Fire Department and for the purposes. A resolution to certify local government endorsement of George Fisher Harville LLC, a wholly owned subsidiary of George Fisher Ltd., located at 7777 Sloan Drive, Little Rock, Arkansas, to participate in the Arkansas Tax Back Program as authorized by Arkansas Code Section 15-4-2706D of the Consolidated Incentive Act of 2003 and for the purposes. A resolution authorized the payment of $20,373.89 to the Little Rock Pulaski Drainage District Number 2 as assessments for the operation, improvement, and maintenance of a levee system to protect various city properties, and to direct that the annual assessment figure, which is currently $15,706, be made as part of the city budget beginning January 1st, 2019, and for the purposes. A resolution authorizes the city manager to reimburse the First Tee of Central Arkansas in an amount not to exceed $115,000 for the cost of the HVAC system at the Jack Stevens Youth Golf Academy and for other purposes. A resolution authorizes the mayor to execute a lease agreement by and between Jefferson Comprehensive Care Systems Incorporated and the city of Little Rock, Arkansas for a maximum of 20 years to provide a medical clinic to serve the homeless at Jericho Way, the city's Homeless Day Resource Center located at 3000 Springer Boulevard, and for the purposes. That concludes the consent agenda.
There's a motion and a second to adopt the consent agenda. Any discussion? All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. The consent agenda is adopted. We can now move on to a reading of Resolution 6. Please, Madam Clerk.
A resolution authorizes the city manager to execute a 2-year contract with ShotSpotter Incorporated, doing business as SST Incorporated, in a total amount not to exceed $290,000 for the purchase of a wide area gunshot detection services for the Little Rock Police Department and for the purposes.
Move for the adoption of the resolution.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. I have one card who wishes to speak on this. We did have a presentation from our city manager and our police chief at our agenda meeting last week. Mr. Moore, do you have anything else at this moment?
I don't, Mayor. We're still recommending approval.
All right, very well. I've got one card who wishes to speak against the passage of Resolution 6, let me call on Mr. Russ Raycott, please.
Thank you, Mayor and Board. Last month, I sent an email to the board on May the 7th that I'm sure most of you have, except for Director Wright. She deletes hers. And spoke about that. This program is one that many cities that have used it have backed out of. One that was included in the email was Charlotte PD. They said, and I quote, "This program did not help them make arrests or identify criminal victims, and the return on the investment was just not worth it." Falls River, Massachusetts, on the 23rd of April, said that the program worked for less than 50% of the time, and when they were going to back out of it, this company came in and gave them a free year's worth of service and tried to fix the problems, and they still weren't able to fix it, and so now they've just abandoned it. There are also some concerns. The company last year, they do it every year. They send out a sheet to the police departments and tell them how to avoid responding to FOI requests. It gives them all the stuff and tells them what to do and how proven methods to thwart these requests. We have enough trouble with transparency with the police department. There's currently a lawsuit that I've filed against the chief and the department for failure to follow the statutes and the law with respect to things. And this will be another thing that I promise you will have the police department of the city back in court. And I feel sure that you guys are going to go ahead and vote for this. The chief spoke at a press conference with the mayor last month that the chief said he can go before the board and get anything he wants. This is the same chief that when he went to, I believe it was Charleston, and applied for a job, and I've posted that video on YouTube and it's been on the news. He said that Little Rock was in his rearview mirror. And I took that to mean that he was done with Little Rock. The problems that he had over here were behind him. And I think that some of the things I've heard the chief say is, well, you know, this will be the board getting into directing our policing and things like that. Well, I don't think I have to tell Director Wyrick a couple of years ago, the chief blew up at her when she made some questions, and if it wasn't for Bruce Moore stepping in, I feel like that he probably would have been fired at that time. And if the chief is so concerned about laws, then he needs to enforce some of the ones we have on the books. The biggest one that I've complained about is not issuing tickets to police officers.
If you'd focus on the specific
well, I'm getting there. And then the other one,
the item 6 on ShotSpotter, it's not about some of these other issues that you brought to us before.
Well, I'm just saying that if the chief is going to bring up that argument, then I think it's full of hypocrisy. And these are just another reasons that you need to go ahead and fire the chief. Thank you for your time.
Vice Mayor Webb, you're recognized, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question for the city manager. As you know, I was out of town last week on city business, but I was reading, so I didn't hear the presentation, but this morning I was reading an article about Chicago and about a recent downturn in crime, a significant downturn in crime, and one of the items listed for that was the ShotSpotter. So I wanted to know how to reconcile what I read about Chicago this morning and what we've heard. And so since I missed the presentation, I just wonder if you could answer that.
Sure, and I'll ask Chief to also come up and just address those issues regarding ShotSpotter. But we have done our due diligence. Captain Terrell, when he was over that area, now Captain Temple. So we do look at best practices across the country. As the mayor mentioned, there's a potential that one of the providers of dark fiber might be in this space also, and we can utilize that partnership. So again, this is all grant money and seized money that we're paying for this, and the police department feels very strongly that this is just another tool in their box to help stop and prevent future crimes in a very targeted area. Chief.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the board, a couple of things. I want to reiterate that First of all, there are no tax dollars being used for this 2-year experiment. I think that needs to be at the forefront of this conversation. But even still with that, we don't want to waste grant-funded money. It's $250,000 from a grant that we applied for, competed with several other cities to get this money. The other $40,000 of the $290 comes from seized funds from other arrests that we've made. It does not cost the city anything. Total of $290 for 2 years that we get to test this equipment. If at the end of the 2-year testing period that we say that we like the equipment, then there's about $165,000 annually going forward with a 5% cost of living increase each year if we want to continue it. As the city manager stated, this is part of kind of a comprehensive approach to trying to reduce gun violence. This, by no shape of the imagination, is a silver bullet. And I'm not aware of one that exists. But we do think that this is a tool that will assist us with some of the challenges that we've had in our city. So what does the tool look like? So the tool itself is kind of an acoustics piece of equipment that will give us kind of pinpoint location as to where shots have taken place. ShotSpotter research tells us that we're only getting about 30% of the actual shots fired in our city that are being called in. So one thing we'll get is more accurate information of where we're actually getting shots fired. Allows us to go in and very quickly gather the casings from those locations, analyze that, and then be able to make kind of link analysis to other locations, other weapons that we seize, and individuals to try to determine where some of these crimes are occurring and who's committing some of those crimes. Part of that comprehensive approach that we already have is license plate readers and then camera systems. So there's about 50 cameras in the city of Little Rock, and then we've just purchased some more license plate readers. So let's say, for example, we have a shot fired at First and Broadway. Goes off, we've got cameras in the area there. So one of the things we're going to look at, we're going to examine those casings. We're going to look at camera systems to see what vehicles, what individuals came in or out of that area, what license plates were picked up by the license plate reader, begin to connect all of this information to try to put cases together. Again, this is not a silver bullet, but we have to have pieces like this in order to be able to try to get some traction with some of these issues that we're having. Another piece of that I'll just start at the grant process with is to get a NIBIN machine, which allows us to not have to go to the state and get in line with other agencies who are waiting for your place in line to get your analysis done. We will have our own in-house, which some of the cities that have had issues with violent crime have taken this step so that we can be able to do that in-house, not having to go behind other folks, and to be able to do that more quickly to get information to our investigators. So that will be a part of that network. The other part that I think is important when we talk about, well, this hasn't worked in other cities, or someone had the equipment at one point and then they did away with it. How many times have you been to a conference to where you're talking to your peers and they say something about, well, we have this initiative that we're doing in Seattle, Washington. And because you know the uniqueness of Little Rock, you immediately know, because you know your city, that sounds good for the 10 things that you just listed, but I think only 5 of them will work in Little Rock. You have to build your model at what works for your challenges, which is what we're trying to do. So the example that the gentleman used, he said, Charlotte. Well, what he didn't tell you, there's information, there's a narrative to everything. Charlotte had the equipment temporarily. It was part of a Homeland Security grant that they received to host the Democratic National Convention. Temporary. So if you wanted, after this 60-day period that you have it for this Super Bowl that's going on in your city, then you pick up the tab after that going forward. They chose not to. Who knows why they didn't keep the equipment? They only had it for 60 days. So that's another part of that story that I think that you should consider. We may look at the equipment 2 years at no cost to our citizens and say the same thing. But I think that considering the kind of challenges that we have in our city, we owe it to our community that when we have opportunities to go for grant dollars, that we pursue them. We try to be reflective of best practices. If it doesn't work, we've learned something, we put that in our mental toolbox, we move forward and continue to try to do things to reduce gun violence. We think it's reflective of best practices. The Department of Justice, which we were participating in a program called the Violence Reduction Network, used it as a recommendation to cities who are challenged, like Little Rock, like New Orleans, like Chicago, like Denver, like Cincinnati, cities that have the equipment. We heard cities that had it and went away with it. There's 100 cities or so that are using it right now, and that's growing every day with that. So we want to be in line. If it's working, we want to try it out. If it doesn't cost us anything, and I would ask that you please consider that in a favorable vote.
All right, very good.
I was just going to say, thank you for that. And again, I mentioned that article I read this morning about it, and it said, I mean, almost everything I've read about Chicago, which, as we all know, has a tremendous crime problem and
Yes,
a lot
ma'am.
of shooting incidents. And it said that year to date, it's down 20%.
Mm-hmm.
Gun-related homicides down 20%, but shooting incidents dropped 26%.
Mm-hmm.
And they're the biggest users of ShotSpotter in the country.
Mm-hmm. And I also have friends around the country. I have, of course, my former agency of Louisville, that they have the technology. I'll call my people there. How do you like it? What do you think about it? They gave it a thumbs up. My former boss and mentor, Chief White in Denver, they have it. How do you like it? What do you think about it? They gave it a thumbs up. They have no incentive to lie to me. We have a personal relationship. If it was crap, they would tell me, man, don't fool with it. They would say it. They didn't say that. They gave it a thumbs up, so that gave me the comfort to move beyond what the salesman was giving us, because everyone can give a good sales pitch. People that I know that study this profession, that are students of best practices, have recommended it, and we think we should give it a shot.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chief. I will let everybody know that violent crime is down 23% from last year here in the city, and 17% on property crime. So, Chief, hopefully, if this does pass and we do implement it, hopefully we'll get those numbers down even lower. Director Capiris, you're recognized, please.
Well, I think the chief answered most of my questions. I can't think of any reason we don't do this. It doesn't cost us anything. It looks like it helps in a lot of places. We don't have to keep it after 2 years, and I call the question and let's vote on it.
Well, the question's been called. Is there a second to that? Second. All in favor of calling the question indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. The motion passes, so we'll now move on to a vote on the resolution. All in favor of the passage of the resolution indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. The resolution is passed. Director Adcock, do you have
Yes,
something?
Mayor, we have 8 empty seats in here, and we still have lots of people standing in the hallway, so they might want to come in while we're going on into the separate items. Yeah.
Okay, we can now move on to the next item on our agenda, which is citizen communication. We have lots of cards tonight. We allot 30 minutes at this time collectively for citizen communication. It looks like I've got at least 7 different topics that people have asked to speak on. So there's one item where I've got about 10 cards. There's several items where I have 3 or 4 cards. So if I would ask you not to be repetitive of those people who may be speaking on the same topic, number one. And based on the number of cards we have, you've got about 52 seconds apiece. So that means to be very specific and direct as it relates to your comments and questions and concerns that you want to relate to us. So with that, you need to press your microphone. Not on. Now you're on. Thank you, Director Richardson, for helping your colleague there. Yes, Director Hendricks.
Ready? The thing that I want to say is I want to caution the mayor of limiting you all. I have sat here in this seat sometimes where some people are talking for over almost an hour on an issue. So can we raise that to an hour and a half?
Can you do
There's
what?
a lot of people here for Wards 1, I can tell you that. Would you all raise your hands, more than one people? Come on. Okay.
Are you making a motion?
Well, I know it's not going to pass, but I'm just letting the public know that I represent them. I know it's not going to pass, but I let them know that I'm not afraid to speak for the people that voted for me.
Oh, I don't think anybody thinks that, Director Hendricks.
You got that right.
All right, let's see what we can do. 52 seconds apiece, please, or somewhere close to that, if you would. The first issue has to do with the Bella Vista Apartments, Valencia White.
Hello, I'm Valencia White, and I lived at Bella Vista for 6 years. In that time, the living conditions is kind of bad. We have mold in the apartments. The structure on the outside is falling. The siding is falling off. They're not replacing anything. Our maintenance staff is not qualified. They're not fixing things in a timely manner. We're having to call 3 or 4 different times, weeks at a time, just for them to get to us and deal with our issues. And, we have a lot of people that are disabled and have disabilities and things like that, and it's costing us our health and everything for them to do anything about it. It's just that our apartments it's not really a good thing, a good place right now. We need the city to come and look at it.
Very good. Thank you very much, Valencia. And I would assume this is on our list, but is that correct, Mr. Moore? All right. LaKinda Williams.
Hello, my name is LaKinda Williams. I live in Bella Vista apartment, and I have a 1-year-old that has been in the hospital 4 times last year due to the mold in the apartment. I had a water leak between my front room and my bathroom that they would not fix. So I have mold in there, and it's all on the window sills, and they will not fix it. And he has asthma and breathing problems now. He's on like 6 different types of medicine.
All right. Well, thank you, Ms. Williams. Our staff is being made aware of this item. Certainly, the report we just heard earlier seems to be appropriate as it relates to some of the conditions that were inspected and discovered. So we'll have our code officers out there to take a look at it.
Okay, thank you.
Dorothy Avance. Dorothy Avance. Okay. These apartments are at 6510 Mableville Cutoff, which would be in Southwest Little Rock. Yeah, Ward 2, the Ward 2 portion of Southwest Little Rock. Okay, we can now move on to Kathy Gray from the Whitmore Neighborhood Association.
Hi, I'm Katty Gray. I'm speaking on behalf of Jackie Randalls, who's the president of our association. We have several members here. She wanted me first to thank the board for reinvesting our tax dollars in the drainage, the resolution that you passed tonight. Secondly, we want to go on record that we want to have Southside Park renamed for Ed Johnson. Ed, are you in here? Ed Johnson has spent the last 47 years coaching youth sports from Southside Park, which has a major flooding problem. We would like to find out how that flooding problem can be mitigated as well, and whether there is money left over in the resolution y'all just passed to do additional mitigation work. Lastly, the Martin Luther King Heritage Center on Martin Luther 30th and Martin Luther King Drive, the city has finally come out and cut the grass. The telephone there does not work. What used to be a beautiful white picket fence is in tatters. We have called repeatedly for them to just remove the tattered fence. Okay? Thanks.
Thank you. We'll note those 3 issues. Vincent Tolliver.
Good evening, Mayor, to my director who celebrated her 21st birthday yesterday. It's always good to be here. I came in support of my friend Katty as it relates to the Whitmore Circle neighborhood. But I also want to congratulate Neil Seeley and his team for an excellent report regarding the Little Rock Health Impact of Housing Project, because I think housing certainly is a concern of the city, and they did a great job. I can't wait to get my hands on that. And then I also wanted to take this opportunity to invite any of the city directors to attend a homeless summit that I am hosting myself at COWS at some point this month. I will send out individual invites, and this will be a stakeholders meeting, a cross-industry stakeholders meeting for businesses in Little Rock to come together to see how we can deal with the current homeless population, specifically the development of a 24-hour, 7 days a week homeless facility in Little Rock. And finally, for those of you
Your time is up, Mr. Tyler.
Sure. I
Got to
understand
respect
that.
everybody on this.
And so as I take my seat, Mayor, for those of you who did not have a chance to read the afternoon online edition of the Arkansas Democrat Gazette,
This is not the place to politic. But
I disagree.
It's well noted. It's well noted. Okay, let's see. Johnny Hassan.
Peace be upon you. Which one of the issues you want me to do? I had two cards. One
Over policing in the community.
Okay, very good. The question that I have, and I posed to one of the city members, I attended the People's Campaign, the Poor People's Campaign, and for whatever reason, I noticed that there was a large cadre of police officers at the police campaign. Actually, there was more police there than it was citizens that participated in the Poor People's Campaign. And I just wanted to raise that question because of the over-policing of that. You had the small tanks, when I talked to the little cars, motorcycles, and then you had the bicycles and all of that. So on that particular mission, my question is that our community is being over-policed, and we'll talk about that because the neighborhood association.
Thank you. You're finished. Not yet. I'll call you in when it's time. Thank you. Shalonda Michelle.
So in Ward 2, it's a food desert. And so I wanted to bring that to the attention of the board. There are no grocery stores there. And why? And also there's not a lot of employment there as well. And that's frustrating, especially dealing with an underserved community already.
Thank you, Shalonda. And we're well aware of that, and certainly have tried to encourage the private sector to get involved in bringing a grocery store back to that area of the community. So I know not only myself but others have made requests of the variety of the real estate community who represent those interests to try and help us get a grocery store back in that area. In the meantime, we've got our mobile food mart that is making regular stops there to try and assist with fresh produce. You're done. But we'll take your comments after the meeting. Okay, the next category of cards, I've got Sheila Miles on a Wright Avenue neighborhood issue. Sheila, welcome.
Hello, Mayor and Board of Directors. My name is Sheila Miles. I serve as president of the Wright Avenue Neighborhood Association. And I have come before you this evening to express concern about ongoing criminal activity that's occurring within our neighborhood. And these problems are centered around the business, the community market, prostitution, drug activity, and gunshots. I appeared before you in 2011 concerning activity at that same business, but it was under a different name called Wright Avenue Superstop. We are having those same type of issues today with drug activity, prostitution, criminal conduct, and those type things, shots fired. I'm being beat, but Run Your Bird had to leave, so I'd like to take her time too, if that's okay. The community market does not operate.
God, you can give her an extra 52 seconds. I've got Ms. Bird's card right here.
When hours of operations were extended, the criminal activities escalated, and the business owner feels like it's not his responsibility to control criminal activity at his business. I am told that his business sells drug paraphernalia. I am told that the workers yell at the customers, use profanity, and someone even reported that they observed a worker patronizing a prostitute at that business, and they came from behind the counter putting on clothes. This is a serious matter that really needs to be addressed. We have children, our families walk through that area, our families drive through that area, and it's something that really needs to be addressed. That business really needs to be closed.
Thank you, Sheila. And Mr. I don't see Mr. Moore there, but we'll see what we can do by getting a directed patrol to provide for some enhanced review of that area.
Thank you.
You bet. Annie Abrams on the same issue.
I have her notes. She could not be here.
Nobody can really speak for Annie Abrams. We know that.
She gave me her notes.
We'll take the issue collectively in hand. We understand what it is. This is not a new area. This is not a new issue for us. We're aware of it.
All right. Thank you.
Sheila. Very creative. Yeah. All right. Ruby Jeffries on Jericho Way.
Good evening and greetings from the South End Neighborhood Association Coalition. I'm Ruby Jeffries and I'm president of the association coalition. I've lived in the neighborhood since 1954. Representing the coalition today are the president from the South End Neighborhood Group, Mr. Shorter, Marilyn Tarr, a member of the South End Community Organization, Demetri Briggs, the Meadowbrook Club, and Katie Gray, Whitmore Circle. And I think the citizens of the South End, I was going to ask them to stand, but the director has already asked them to show your hands. Show your hands again, please. The purpose of the coalition coming before you today is in twofold. We want to gather information on the Jericho Way House home duplex that is to be built on West 34th Street, south of Roosevelt. And we do have questions that we would like to ask about the Jericho Way House. What type of homes are these?
Let me interrupt you for just a second. You're already out of time, Ruby. So, is there anyone that wishes to give up their time to her? Several people did. Give me your names, please.
Carl Farr.
Carl.
Yes.
Who? Ryan Dickerson. Okay. Anyone else? I've got about 10 cards, so. Okay, all right, well, that gives us, that gives you some more time. Go ahead, Ruby,
Okay, thank
please.
you. Okay, what types of homes are they? There are questions I would just like to ask that we would like to know. What types of homes are the Jericho Way homes? Who will live in these homes, and why was Ward 1 targeted? What is the application process and qualifications for living in these homes? And what is the source of income of the persons that are living in the homes? who manage the homes, and is there a curfew? And is there an evaluation process within a year's time? Could anyone answer those questions for us? City Manager.
Well, we'll take down what your
Okay.
questions are and certainly be able to work with Jericho Way.
Okay,
Or
okay.
with DePaul International,
Okay.
relative to answers to those questions.
Okay, board members, we want to be informed, and when we request an audience with you during citizens' communication, we should be granted the privilege of coming before you and sharing our concerns with you about our neighborhood. The coalition made 3 formal requests to come before you and to show you our concerns on a 11-minute video. To this date, no response. The request was not granted, and each of you received 3 formal requests
Well-
from the South End.
Yeah, and that was on another issue, granted.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. But we would still like to have the showing of the video.
And I know that I reached out to you and said I'd be happy to visit with you and
With
the
you-
association.
With you, not with the board. We want to meet with the board. Thank you.
Leola Saab.
I'm gonna need 3 minutes. Hi, I'm Leola Saab. I live at 3315 Martin Luther. I'm going to read this to try to get it in 52 seconds. We are devastated by the city's intention to build a homeless shelter in our community. We presently are struggling with a high rate of crime, property loss, deteriorating housing, and a significant homeless population already. We have repeatedly asked the city for help for finding ways to revitalize our community. Adding a shelter for the homeless will in no wise diminish our community issues. As we already have too many unemployed and homeless people walking the streets of the South End looking for victims of opportunity, committing crimes, and terrorizing the elderly. To compound our plight by adding additional homeless people to the streets of our community only echoes the city's lack of concern for our welfare.
Thank you.
That was my...
I believe there's a substantial amount of misinformation about this issue. You've noted that this is a halfway house. The city's not building any halfway houses. The city is not building any homeless shelters. So hopefully we can get proper information to the community about what what we understand DePaul is doing. Joyce Dixon is next, please.
Good evening, Mayor and Board of Directors. I'm here to speak on the same issue. We are, oh, okay, I'm kind of short, okay. Yeah, we are located right there at 33rd Street. It's the corridor for a lot of activities for our youth. We have the Boys and Girls Club. There we have the Crump Park there. We're renovating that and doing updates on it so that our kids will have a place to play and, and come and do activities. For them to put a halfway house or a homeless shelter, anything there that will disrupt our neighborhood and put our kids and our seniors at risk is really unacceptable to us.
Thank you. Thank you, Joyce. As I said, there's no halfway house, no homeless shelter being built there. So I'm not sure who's giving you that information.
Then provide the details.
Well, I'm just telling you that, and Ruby was very nice to ask some questions, and I'm sure that we don't have all those answers, but I know we can get the answers for you. So I know we have some of them, but myself and Vice Mayor Webb and Director Peck and others have been working with DePaul on these issues in terms of housing, but it's not anything that is a halfway house or a homeless shelter. So.
Can you tell us if it's permanent dwellings? We want only permanent residents.
Kim Harris is next, please.
My name is Kim Harris. I live at 1121 West 34th. You're saying it's not going to be one? My brother is a homeless person. He's dealing with this man that owned this property at 1201, 1205, which is adjacent across the street from me. So if you're saying it's not going to be a homeless shelter, halfway house, I don't need that. Next door to me, my property value isn't going up. If you all allow this, can we come stay with one of y'all? I'm just being frank. You know, homeless people need some help, but not in the South End. Not in the South End. Dunbar has a bus stop at that corner. McClellan has a bus stop at that corner. Thank you very much.
Okay, Gerald Gregory. Marilyn Todd.
Hi, my name is Marilyn Todd, and I'm new to the South End, and I do take out the time to research the information. One of the houses that has been built by has been purchased by Jericho Way is actually being dedicated tomorrow. And I'm sure a lot of you guys will be out there tomorrow. June the 6th at 1 p.m., one of the 13 homes that Jericho DePaul has set up. So only thing it has to do is be researched. It's not a halfway house that they're proposing. And I actually went to Jericho Way to find out personally for myself, to find out exactly what it was. So they're proposing 13 homes, 151 countries, and Little Rock are the first 13 that are going to be built. It's going to be built from the properties that's in the land bank, and this one was purchased 6601 Heather Lane off Fortune Pike. So there's knowledge on the internet. Everything that you need is on the internet. So these answers, the questions that they had, they could have already been answered because it's all out there.
Very good. Thank you, Marilyn. Okay, that concludes, well, not quite. Is Edmund Davis in the audience? Mr. Davis, you've mentioned a yellow card for item 18, which is actually our executive session.
Yes, sir.
And then you've also got a white card on it. What is your concern relative to the executive session?
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and to the board, and to the city manager, and Tom Carpenter, thank you. My query was really about the issue of the term limits for the board members, and of course.
That is not on the agenda today.
No, I saw it. A lack thereof. It was under number item 18. It talked about the Arkansas Arts and a couple of other under the synopsis. I just had a question about does the board have term limits? And so if they are, could we know about those term limits?
That is not on the agenda at all today. It has nothing to do with resolution with item 18.
But does the board have term limits, though, Mr. Mayor?
No, they do not, but no, they do not.
Okay.
This board does not have term limits. This board has an ordinance that limits boards and commissions to 2 terms unless there's a special circumstance, in which case a 3rd term can be granted. But the elected board of directors does not have a term limit.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Does that answer your questions?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, that concludes our citizen communication. I do think there are a couple comments based on some of the discussion we've had in citizen communication. Let me recognize Vice Mayor Webb first, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I mean, I've talked to Mandy and worked with Mandy very closely, and I think one of the main things that Jericho Way has done that they don't get a lot of credit for, don't get enough credit for, is the fact that they've moved on about 70 people from homelessness to permanent housing over the last year with over a 90% success rate. That's over a 90% success rate, and I think that's very important. And the folks who are going to be living in these houses are going to be screened. They're going to be paying rent. They want permanent housing. They want to get off the street. And some of the groups that I've met who work with Jericho Way, like Settled Souls, who help provide the furniture and all of the kitchen supplies and food and things like that for these folks, it's truly amazing. And I, for one, am proud that Jericho Way is doing this, and I do have a halfway and have had halfway houses in my neighborhood, and this is not a halfway house, it's permanent housing, and we can't talk about homelessness and want to do something about it and then refuse to do affordable housing, in my opinion.
So hopefully that clears up some of the questions that you've had tonight. I said some of the questions, thank you. Director Hendricks, you're recognized, please.
When one of the speakers came to the mic.
Hello, go ahead.
And they mentioned something about they didn't know that this, who was that? Was that you, Miss Sabbs, about the house that's going to be built? The young lady. Yeah. I got the news from the residents that there will be a house. I don't know the name of the house, but homeless people will be in that house on West 34th Street. Bruce, Mr. Moore, your employees brought it to them, pointed out the lot where this house is going to be built, and that's when my phone was inundated with calls. Now, somebody ought to know something. If you've got an employee out here telling people what's going to happen, I should have known that first.
Director Hendricks.
No, just answer. Did you know that your employee was out there telling them something that I didn't know, and maybe you didn't know?
Well, first of all, I think it's very important to know that if the city was going to enter into some partnership with Jericho Way or DePaul, that would have to come to this board. The city owns that lot. I'm
not talking about Mr. Moore. I'm talking about why did your employees go out there? I don't want to hear all that other stuff. I want to know why did they hear it by the grapevine and you didn't know it?
I'm not sure how they heard it.
I know the name of the employee, but I wouldn't dare tell you. I'll tell you after the meeting.
Okay.
That's it. So we need to do something about that. Well, many of the residents have suggested that we build this house over in Quapaw somewhere. A lot of you all said that to me. Why do we inundate our black neighborhood with these people? I don't care whether they're black or white.
This is not property owned by the city. This is not property owned by the city.
We're not taking public comment now, thank you.
For the record.
So Mayor, you understand what I'm saying? So, Mr. Moore, we'll check to see what employee was this out there disturbing the neighborhood. And they're suggesting that this house be built somewhere, maybe in the Quapaw Quarter or wherever.
Mr. Moore, do you want to comment now? I'm going to recognize you independently, if you would like.
Jericho Way, as someone mentioned to Paul, has been looking to buy property. As the lady mentioned, there's a ribbon cutting tomorrow on a piece of property on Heather Lane. There has been no deals cut, no. In fact, the way it came up, they said, is there any city-owned property near our center or in the land bank? And I'm pretty sure we do own the lot. That's what the records show. And so they just inquired about, is it a possibility to build a house on that lot? Now, what the unique thing about it is there's a garden on the lot that the owner has been maintaining for quite some time. I went out and saw it yesterday. So that's where we are. There's been no commitments, no deals. They just inquired about where the city had land that was owned R4, and that's one of the first ones that came up.
Dr. Hendricks, you've got your light on. Do you have another comment? Okay. Okay. Thank you all for your cooperation on getting through citizen communication. I appreciate it. The notes have been taken on the issues you've raised and brought to our attention, and we'll follow back up on it. If there are other questions that need to be answered, we'll do everything we can to get you answers to those. So, okay, we can now move on to our separate items, which are items 13 through 15.
Actually should be grouped. I just didn't.
What?
Actually should be grouped. I didn't change it on here.
Oh, well. I've got a card on 15, so I actually don't have any cards on 13, so why don't we read items 13 and 14 together, please.
An ordinance to condemn certain structures in the city of Little Rock, Arkansas with structural fire and health hazards, to provide for summary abatement procedures, to direct city staff to take such action as is necessary to raise and remove said structures, to declare an emergency and for other purposes. An ordinance to declare it impractical and unfeasible to bid, to authorize the city manager to extend a one-year sole source agreement with City Year Incorporated and the City Year AmeriCorps in amount not to exceed $100,000 relative to the city's educational initiative for use by the Little Rock School District and for the purposes. First reading.
Reading.
There's a motion and a second to suspend the rules and place these two ordinances on second reading. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Second reading, please.
An ordinance to condemn certain structures in the city of Little Rock, Arkansas with structural fire and health hazards, to provide for summary abatement procedures, to direct city staff to take such action as is necessary to raise and remove said structures, to declare an emergency. An ordinance to declare it impractical and unfeasible to bid, to authorize the city manager to extend a one-year sole source agreement with City Year Incorporated and the City Year AmeriCorps in the amount not to exceed $100,000 relative to the city's educational initiative for use by the Little Rock School District. Second reading.
Move to suspend the rules and place on third and final reading.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to suspend the rules and place these two ordinances on third and final reading. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Third and final reading, please.
An ordinance to condemn certain structures in the city of Little Rock, Arkansas with structural fire and health hazards, to provide for summary abatement procedures, to direct city staff to take such action as is necessary to raise and remove said structures, to declare an emergency. An ordinance to declare it impractical and unfeasible to bid, to authorize the city manager to extend a one-year sole source agreement with City Year Incorporated and the City Year AmeriCorps in an amount not to exceed $100,000 relative to the city's educational initiative for use by the Little Rock School District. Third and final reading.
Okay, I don't see anyone that has any questions about any of these items, so all in favor of the passage of these two ordinances indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. The ordinances have passed, and on the emergency clause on item 13, all in favor of the emergency clause indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. The emergency clause is also passed. We can now move on to a reading on item 15, please.
Hey, Tom.
First reading.
Hold on a sec. Do I say that section 1, subsection 2? How do you write? Okay. An ordinance to amend Section 1, Subsection 2 of Little Rock, Arkansas Ordinance Number 21,561 of March the 20th, 2018, to remove the property located at 2901 Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Drive from the demolition list, to declare an emergency and for other purposes. First reading.
There's a motion and a second to suspend the rules and place this ordinance on second reading. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Second reading, please.
An ordinance to amend Section 1, Subsection 2, Little Rock, Arkansas, Ordinance Number 21,561, to remove the property located at 2901 Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Drive from the demolition list, to declare an emergency. Second reading.
Move to suspend the rules and place on third and final reading.
There's a motion and a second to suspend the rules and place this ordinance on third and final reading. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Third and final reading, please.
An ordinance to amend Section 1, Subsection 2 of the Little Rock, Arkansas Ordinance Number 21,561, to remove the property located at 2901 Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Drive from the demolition list, to declare an emergency. Third and final reading.
Okay, I've got one card who wishes to speak against the passage of this ordinance, which is to remove this building from a previous demolition list. Mr. Duffy? Mr. Duffy, are you here?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Board, I spoke before the board in the March 20th meeting, didn't expect to see you so soon, but then found out that at that meeting, the building was condemned and set for to be demolished, and the emergency clause was evoked, and so I thought the building would be down by now. Didn't make the last meeting, but I watched the video. I didn't know that this issue was coming up in the last meeting. I watched the video and I saw Ms. Jeffries talk about tearing off the back of the building, and that that was the problem. That is no longer an eyesore. If you look at those pictures and you look at the back of the building, you see that it still is an eyesore. And I read a report the last time that I spoke from the city of Little Rock, a summary report, July the 26th, 2016, which show you how long this been going on, said a structural damage. The building has structural damage and is falling in, located on the south side of the building. Another warning notice from the City of Little Rock Plan Development dated September the 20th, talking about August 2nd, 2016 inspections, says inspection found the building dilapidated, is determined unsafe, unsanitary, and a fire hazard, and detrimental to the public health and citizens of Little Rock. But I don't think tearing the back of the building off took care of all of those issues. Those issues still exist. Also, Ms. Jeffrey stated when the board asked, had she spoken to someone about the issue after they tore the back off, my pastor wanted you to know. She said that she spoke to him, and he said it looked good. My pastor wants you to know, and he's a man of God, and he would not lie, that he had not talked to her about tearing off the back of the building. So also, if the building's going to be revitalized, what is it going to be? Is it going to be something just to pass by? They have no space. On the north side, it's about 20 feet. On the south side, it's about 4 feet. Front is sidewalk and street. The back is about 12 feet. The church owns all the property up around the building. It's like an island. And also our driveway is right to the north of the building. They have about 20 feet. Without coming across our property, the little space that they have, they might can park 2 cars, they couldn't get to them. So I think we should continue the condemnation.
Thank you, Mr. Duffy. Mr. Moore, subsequent to our previous discussion on this, it looks like you have some additional pictures. Are those photographs that were taken since the time we had conversation about this?
Correct. And let me ask Mr. Collins, our planning director, to come forward.
Scott, if you would run through those pictures again with us, please.
What was the question about the time frame that we took the pictures, Mayor?
Well, I don't. Yeah.
Yes, we went out and took those pictures after that meeting so that we could get the most current ones and to kind of see what some of the pictures were. The previous pictures that we had on there had the rear of the building that was there. These current pictures show not only the area that was removed on the south side of or actually the back side of the building, but also some of the interior, which shows some of the water damage and the structural damage.
And so, Mr. Moore, has planning or codes had any update or any follow up with Ms. Jeffrey about her plans for the rehabilitation of this property since we last had a conversation about it?
Did Quindici give you all a call?
Yeah, Mr. Quindici did give us a call and was talking about putting together a plan. They don't have it in detail yet. One of the main concerns that we raised with them was the structural integrity of the back of the building. Parks about the back third. You can kind of see.
Is that the back right there?
Yeah, you can see right there at the back. That's where the fire damage was. And when we went inside the building to look at it, Scott, go back a couple pictures. I think we might see. There was a door. It looked like about where that fire was, the back side of the building was sagging a little bit, somewhere around 6 inches to a foot to the center and to the back. So I expressed to Mr. Quindici that they needed to hire that's about where it sags, starting to, you kind of see where the door frames are kind of leaning back to the center. Keep scrolling back, Scott, a little bit. That's a good picture. You kind of see the door, how it's wedged in and just the gap of, an inch to 2 inches across the door frame. And there's another door picture I took that was, keep on scrolling, Scott. You kind of see that the back, the one that was straighter, but then it's that very back one has a little lean to it.
Okay.
To the center. So I just expressed that there was some structural integrity problems there, that they really needed to get a professional consultant, structural engineer, to go look at it and prepare a report and provide to staff so that we can see what they need to do to stabilize that structurally, because there's other areas that they need to go look at, as far as you've seen some of the water damage that they need to go and repair. They also we just received an environmental study that did identify 1,200 square feet of asbestos containing floor tile material that needs to be removed, but won't be able to do that until it is structurally sound. And so we was called, Quindici called and said that they are going to do that and obtain a consultant to go do the study and provide it to us.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Collins. I notice that the owner of the property and the architect are here. Do you have any comments you wish to provide to the board at this time? I've got several board members that want to ask questions as well.
Yes, I'm Belinda Jeffries, and I am the owner of the building, along with the trust. The back part of the building that was dilapidated, falling, causing a lot of harm for children, they said, is gone. And when you took that off, then you got a chance to see this part right here is going to be boarded up as well. And so I don't understand what they're talking about, that it's still an eyesore, a problem. We're going to. It's the back of the building where you removed a big, huge structure, which was stairs and porch, that was just removed about 3 weeks ago. And so this part is going to be covered. But the rest of the building is sound. The things that you see that on the inside of the building are things that were torn down as a result of someone trying to pull and find things in the building from the ceiling. Okay.
Mayor and the board, I'm Quindici. Ms. Jeffries has engaged my services as an architect, but as Mr. Collins indicated, I'm not able to evaluate the building because I can't do that from a structural standpoint. Our intent is to have a structural engineer to come in and do an assessment. They need to have access. They need to see what's there. Just a matter of coming back and boarding up everything is not going to help that structural engineer understand what is there now. We have that time period that we need to have the engineer come out, look at what as is. And it's not that we don't want to board up that east side of the building, but we just need to give the structural engineer as much access to view and make a report. And that report would give some indication of what are the critical issues and how to prioritize, how do we deal with the structural issues.
Okay, thank you, Quindici. Mr. Carpenter, does this simply remove it, or does it give a timeline on when they're supposed to be back to tell us about the renovation of the building?
Mayor, it does both. The first section removes it from the previous ordinance, which set it up for demolition. Section 2 of the ordinance requires that the building meet all code provisions, or that it be reviewed by the board on September 4th to determine what the progress has been, that there has to be a document executed that waives notice for future demolition except for one meld notice. If finances and restoration are not provided and the substantial restoration has not been completed by August the 21st, it makes notice that if they wish to go forward, that we'll operate the permits, but that they will expire on September the 3rd. And if the work is not completed, then it would be back in terms of being demolished. And then it's got in provision number 6 that after August the 1st, if it goes for 5 consecutive calendar days, not including a holiday, without work being done on it, then it comes back on the board's agenda to approve demolition.
So, Mrs. Jeffries, there's an awful lot of dates you mentioned there, Mr. Carpenter. It appears, I think from what I understand, there's going to have to be some ability for you to have a financing plan in place by the 1st of August with information. Is that right, Mr. Carpenter?
To accommodate work for this, we'll provide them the permits. Work is to be underway and is necessary and inspected and approved. If at any time after August the 1st, work on the restoration ceases for a period of 5 consecutive days, that's when it can be brought back. The thing has to be basically finished on September the 4th. That was the 4 months that I was asked.
So I'm asking, I'm raising this issue. Have you been, have you looked at this ordinance to see what these deadline dates are?
It's the first I've heard of it.
We went online, we just read what was online, but Mayor, I'd like to say nothing can be determined until we have the structural engineer to.
Well, certainly, we understand that, but there's a very, as I recall, there was discussion at the meeting previously about 4 months, and I guess that's where this idea of September comes in place as an opportunity to do something with this building. But if it's simply going to be to do a structural engineering report and then to board up the back of this to make it look a little better, that's really not going to satisfy, I think, the intentions of this board as it relates to what happens to this building ultimately.
Well, we would like to, when we get the report from the structural engineer, we can create a schedule. What are the most critical areas that need to be dealt with? It could be the foundation. It could be, we don't know where. If we can address those specific areas based on the engineer's report, we can give you a schedule. It may
Well, I
not be
understand, but
September.
there's a schedule already in the ordinance.
Yes, I understand. Well, I guess the question, can we amend that based on the report from the structural engineer, which might occur within the month? We can determine what areas can be dealt with and the time that it would take to do that, including financing. I mean, that's how we would like to approach it. We just
Has anyone, I mean, you're an architect, have you given any estimate to Ms. Jeffries on the cost of renovating this building?
No, I have not. Because of the structural issue, I can't guesstimate. It may be a minor issue, it might be a major issue, and I'm not going to speculate. The structural engineer will tell us, you have to replace this. There's some things on the exterior, like the brick falling. That's not a very critical issue. It is a critical issue, but we're more interested in what is happening to the structure and what it would take to stabilize that building. It may be a minor fix, it may be a major fix, but we won't know that until we have that report.
I understand.
So to be tied with dates and having to come back and the engineer says, well, whatever they may say, we can react to that with the schedule and sort of a cost estimate.
Okay, there's some directors who wish to ask comments or have comments or questions. Director Adcock, you're first, please.
Ms. Jeffries, have you secured any financing for this?
I'm in the process of getting some grants and looking into some of the finances that we have already from other Helen Williams Jeffries Revocable Trust.
Mm-hmm. How much money are you thinking you're going to spend on this building?
It's hard to tell. I don't have an exact number of how much. Things would be happening in phases. And so when we, whatever is needed to be spent on the building in order to bring it back to 1929's condition, that's what we're going after right now.
I have a couple questions for Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins, you heard Mr. Duffy talk about the limited parking spaces around this building. Have you looked at that to see how many parking places would be available for this building?
The limitation on the parking spaces is on the north and the south side, or at least the long side of the building. They could put probably about 3 parallel parking stalls on one side and maybe about 5 in the back, or would be the east side. The south side does not have any room between the building and the property line to do anything with.
And there's no room, Martin Luther King at that point does not have on-street parking, correct?
It does not have on-street parking.
Okay, then you've told us 8 parking places.
Now that's a I would say maximum. Now, granted, the ones on the north side or the parallel They would have to also use or co-use the driveway that the church utilizes right now.
I don't think
If the church lets them use that, because the access to this building is in the back. The alleyway is where all those properties also accessed.
Okay, so if this is a commercial building, that would limit what kind of commercial business could be in here if there's only 8 parking places, correct?
That's correct. It would limit it more of a office type use. You know, wouldn't have that many occupants.
And I think that this in the past has been partially residential and partially commercial.
Yes, it has been a little bit of commercial. It's been several things in the past, from a real estate office to a mortuary to, there's barbershop. There was also residential upstairs. So there's been several uses that's been in there. Some is office and some has been
Does
commercial.
your department still recommend demolishing this building?
We recommend that if the board chooses to proceed with removal of this, that it be done in a timely manner and have a plan and address the issues that we have found in our inspection, which is the structural issues and also the asbestos and what it would take to rejuvenate this building.
I thought from last week that this building was secure, but it's not secure. From the pictures we've just seen tonight, it's got lots of big gaping holes in it. Can this building be secured?
The building can be secured. The holes that are in it is on that east side or the rear of the building, and that's for the removal of that structure that was attached to the building on the back. The sides and the front has all been secured.
I know that when Mr. Duffy was before us, before they was talking about the children getting in the building and at the staircase is gone, but I can still see where this would be dangerous for children to play inside.
That's about, I would say that's somewhere between 3 and 4 foot off the ground is that back door.
Okay.
So it's an elevated access.
Okay, thank you.
Director Wright, you're recognized, please.
Director Adcock asked several of my questions, but I did have, and I don't know if Mr. Carpenter, do I have the liberty to ask what the owner plans to do with this building? Can I ask that question? Okay, because with the limited parking, what would you do with it?
Our primary intent is to bring the building back up to codes and standards so that the structural issues, the asbestos issues are taken care of. The second step, the phase, if you want to call it that, is to restore the exterior as it was to the best of our ability when it was built in 1929. Now, that doesn't require us, if we get to that point, to come back to you or come back to the Planning Commission to say we want to use the building for whatever it means. It's going to look with windows and doors and brick all in very good shape. I mean, are we required to make the building functional after we restore the exterior, after it's brought up to codes and standards?
I think the logical question is, why would you invest hundreds of thousands of dollars and you don't know what you're going to do with the building?
Well,
just to have it restored to?
Well, we've heard the word eyesore. We want to eliminate the matter of having it as an eyesore. So if the owner is not willing or not able or for whatever reason to go forward with restoring or rehabilitating the interior for whatever purpose, that can happen, but it's not in the same sequence. We want to get the building again back to codes and standards. We want to restore the exterior. New windows, basically new windows, restored brick, new roof shingles. It looks like it did in 1929 to the best of our ability. That's subject to evidence that we can find through photographs and whatever. But that's the intent. Now,
but according to the time frames, as the mayor indicated, there is just no way that you can do all of that by September 1st.
Well, that's my point. I'm saying again, based on the structural engineer's report, we can come back to you with the schedule of what can be done to deal with the structural issues. It may take longer than September 1st to deal with that. That's the critical issue, are the codes and standards that are not up to par. And the structural engineer says that we need to do certain things within the interior or exterior to bring up the building be more structurally stable. That's our goal. That may take longer than September 1. That's our point.
May I read sections 2 and 3 to Mr. Quindici and get his opinion as an architect as to whether he thinks they can be met? Because that's really the crux of this ordinance. It is on. Section 2 reads, this repeal is at the request of the Helen Williams Jeffries Revocable Trust, the owner of the building. However, it will be reviewed by the Board of Directors no later than on the meeting September 4, 2018 to determine what progress has been made on the restoration of the structure and of the acquisition of sufficient resources to complete the restoration project. Section 3, the Helen Jeffries Revocable Trust shall execute an appropriate document that waives notice of further action of the city to demolish the structure except for one mailed notice to the trust if both restoration and finances for the restoration are not provided. Further, substantial restoration needs to be completed before August 21, 2018, which at a minimum brings the structure into compliance with all relevant city building, fire, and other code provisions.
So I wrote down that.
Do you think that can be
Mr.
done?
Carpenter, how can that August date doesn't jive with your September date? I'm trying to figure that out.
September.
I mean, you're asking them to come before the board to tell us what they're going to do to restore it and if they got adequate financing by September 4th. And then you say in August, prior to that date, they've got to have it substantially finished.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem to
Well,
quite.
as I understood the direction I was given last week, it was 4 months to get the building restored. And so I put a little wiggle room in there if it's not totally restored by September the 4th, which meant that it was in compliance with all code provisions by August the 21st.
But
When I
August
came here in
21st
March-
is prior to the September 4th deadline.
That's right, it is. And if they don't have that done, then this suggests that on September the 4th, the board's going to put it back on a demolition list.
Mayor, what I'm hearing and knowing what I know about construction, you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars here. And you're talking tradesmen and engineers, and there is just no way this can be done in this time frame. So I'm just at a loss to understand why someone would want to invest this kind of money and you don't have a plan for what you're going to do with this building.
We never thought we were going to get it done in 3 months. I came to you on March the 20th, and then March the 20th to April the 20th is 1 month. April the 20th to May the 20th is 2 months. We haven't even gotten into the 3rd month, and you're already still talking about we've been 4 months.
This is requiring 4 months. This is giving you an additional 4 months. No, I know. That's why I'm asking these questions, because I was trying to figure out.
Well, Director, that time period, I can say it to answer Attorney Carpenter's question, that's not feasible.
No.
It's not feasible. So the ordinance as written, I would suggest that you allow a sufficient time period where we can meet that objective. I mean, but again, I keep repeating, I cannot say what the structural engineer might say. I can say what I can say as an architect, but the process to do that, it's not going to happen in 4 months. It's just not going to happen. I don't know how that 4-month period came about, but it's not feasible.
All right. We have other people wish to speak. Director Hendricks, you're next, please.
Yes. This building has been vacant for many years.
16.
What?
2016 was
Yeah,
the last
I
time.
live right around the corner from this building, and the building has been vacant. It has been in the condition that it's in for a number of years. Mr. Duffy is an administrator of the church. The church has attempted to buy this property from the owner. It may not be relevant to you all, but it would have helped to get that building restored or either torn down. So the church is concerned. We did give, in fact, Ms. Jeffrey came to us with nothing. If I were trying to save a building, I think I would have brought something. So this is her 3rd time here, and she still has nothing. So what do I tell the church? What do I tell the church?
You were for it last week. You said that you were for saving the building, and now you're saying What?
No.
If you'd put
Yeah,
the
we save the
microphone,
building,
Ms.
you come
Jeffries.
with something, but you keep coming with nothing.
Can't hear you, please.
Yeah, you keep
Last
coming
week,
with nothing.
on the 15th, you were saying you were for saving the building.
Mayor, I'm not through talking. So she needs
But
to
this
be
week-
quiet. Okay, and to look at what Jamie has said, it's a lot. And Jamie, you had someone over there doing with the asbestos, maybe not you, but he was out there last week. With the asbestos, that building is ferocious with asbestos. And I'm like, Director Wright, she needs to come to us. She should have come to us with a plan, with where the money's coming from. She's mentioned to us that there's a division in the heirs of this property. We don't know where it's going with that. We have had other people to come before this board with facts on paper. So that's what I'm still asking. I'm in support of the church. I think that the family should have done something with this building before now. And I want to let the audience know that the board had voted for this building to be demolished. And when the owner came pleading to us, we gave her 4 months. She's been before us 3 times and still hasn't brought us nothing in writing. I know this gentleman is an engineer or whatever it is. I know he wants to make a living, but not at the expense of the church, not wanting that building there. I'm through.
Director,
sorry.
Director Wyrick, you're next, please.
A question for staff. Most of my questions have already been answered, and this one was asked, but I want to drill down a little bit more. Jamie, can you come forward? In the write-up, it says in here that it's staff's recommendation that the structure remain condemned and the city continue with the demolition process. But your recommendation for this item 15 says approval.
Well, part of that write-up was from the original write-up, and then in discussion with Tom, the city attorney's office, and also went looking at the site. You know, the city, we're not in the demolition business. We want to see the property rejuvenated and rehabilitated. And so that was all part of that time frame. You know, we are, you know, if they would come with a plan, you know, finances, and show us how they're going to rehabilitate and redo this building in a time frame and not sit there for 2 or 3 years in the same condition, then we are in support of that. I mean, we just don't want it sitting. We want a plan. We want to see when they're going to fix things up, a schedule, you know, and a time frame.
Well, from what I've heard tonight, there's not a plan. There's financial information has not been provided. So we don't know any of that. And part of the reason is because we have to have a structural engineer to look at the property. So based on where we are today, is staff recommending approval or denial?
We're recommending approval, you know, when we get, you know, for that structural assessment, and also to come with a plan within the next month to, you know, to let us know what they're doing.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Director Fortson, you're recognized, please.
One quick question, Ms. Jeffries. I understood you to say that you intended to fund this with grant money.
And revocable trust money that we have on hand.
Are you financially prepared to begin without knowledge of whether the grants will be granted?
I have just started to begin. When I took that structure off, that was $6,500.
Right, but going forward, the other steps, structural engineers and all those things cost money. Can that begin before you have an answer on the grants?
Not before September, the date that you're giving me, but we're looking into that.
Well, my only reason for my question is the city applies for grants from time to time. There's no guarantee just because you apply that a grant will be approved. And so if you are not successful in the grants, are you back at square one?
There are more than just one part of the building has to be looked at. There are phases of this building that we would like to get together. And so what you're saying is if I don't get all the money from one source, would I get it from another source? Is that what you're asking me?
Well, no, I'm asking, do you have, I understand you've applied. Applying for grants sort of like applying for a loan. You don't know yet whether they're going to say yes or no or put conditions on it. And my question is, are you prepared to begin substantially before you know the answer on those grants? Number one. Number two, if the answer is negative, what do you do then?
Well, I am prepared to begin now, but without the grant.
Okay.
Yeah, Ms. Jeffries, I'm very familiar with this area of what goes on in our city and our state. And if you're relying on grants for a private residence like this, you are, I'm just telling you, there's very little money out there at all. There may be a small, very small amount of money you might discretionarily get from the Department of Arkansas Heritage. I think Wendici probably knows as much about this and can advise you on it. But if you're really thinking that there's going to be a substantial amount of money for grants, I'm afraid you're sorely mistaken. So just want to let you know that, which means you're going to have to look at your own funding sources. Now, if it's income producing property and you want to get a tax credit, a 20% tax credit from the federal government on that, you can do that. You can get a state tax credit. That's generally the benefit that the state provides. It's not in the form of just simply people giving grant money to properties that may have some historical significance, which I suspect is what Wendici's looking at, is that it may have some historical significance that would allow some small amount of money maybe as a grant. But it's a tough hill to climb to get that money. I'm just telling you. So anyway, Director Hendricks, you're next, please.
Do I need to make a motion, or what do we need to do?
No, Director Richardson wants to say
Oh,
something.
okay, go ahead.
Director Richardson.
Call the question, Mayor.
All right, the question's been called. The question's been, is there a second to calling the question? Is there a second? All in favor of calling the question indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. All right, we'll move on to a vote. All those in favor of the ordinance, which will remove the property from the demolition list, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed to the ordinance indicate by saying nay. I believe the nays have it, which means that it'll stay on the demolition list. So your other remedies are probably in some other venue other than the city board.
A clarification? May we ask clarification?
Sure, go ahead.
If we go ahead and have the structural analysis done, report as indicated to staff, to planning and development, have the schedule, would that have any impact on further discussion or further action? If we just walk away and do nothing, or do we proceed with the structural analysis as we've agreed to do?
I hear what you're saying. The board has passed an ordinance putting it on the demolition list. They heard a request to have that reconsidered, and that was what this ordinance is. It would take probably a board member asking specifically to put this back again on the agenda for removal to remove it from the demolition list in order for that to occur. I don't know whether you have that ability to convince one of these board members to do that or not, Ms. Jeffries. So I would think that would be the way that you could get it back on the agenda again if you so choose.
Well, yeah, I think just communicating with Jamie Collins' and his staff about our process.
I don't want to speak for Mr. Moore, but Mr. Moore was the one that was willing to put this on as a removal based on the conversation that we had at our last agenda meeting. I don't know whether he would be inclined to do it again if an engineering report came back that said it was minor and, it could be repaired relatively inexpensively.
Mayor, I think the board has spoken twice on this issue, and there's a process that it will undertake to take bids, and that's something that usually takes 30 days or something. Yeah, but I mean, and I went out there last week with the staff, and I think we all can know that it's going to take a significant amount of capital. And I think one of the things that Ms. Jeffries was saying is, well, I'm just going to do the make it structurally sound and do the outside, and then figure out maybe what to do, because she keeps mentioning phases. But at this point, I think the board has spoken, and we'll move forward with our regular process.
All right, thank you very much. All right, it is now 8:30, and we typically take a break at this time. Is there a motion to take a recess for a period of time? All right, we'll be in recess for about 20 minutes. Okay, we are now back in session.
Mayor.
And we are now prepared to go to ordinance number 16.
Mayor, I'd like a point of personal privilege, please.
All right, go ahead, Director Richardson. Oh, turn your microphone on.
It's 9 o'clock, Mayor, and given the amount of time, inordinate amount of time we spent on some issues, the last one included, I'd like to deviate from our current or normal procedure and ask that, I think the chief did a short presentation last week. I think a number of you guys had pressed your buttons and also said that the chief answered your question, and I think you made reference to your former colleague, our current prosecutor, having issues with this. So I'd like to have the chief do his presentation, and hopefully it's briefly, Chief. And one of the things that's disconcerting to me, Mayor, we had far more people here, I know, in support of this that weren't necessarily going to speak. But given the nature of the work that they do the work, don't talk about the work. Someone had to leave and go back and get in the community and conduct the work that we need in our community. So we have a lot of folks who are actively involved and not just talking about it. I'd like to, with your permission, my board colleagues' permission, to proceed that way, and hopefully to expedite the rest of our time.
I'm not sure what you're asking for, Director.
I'm asking for the chief to do a presentation, and hopefully to preempt some of the cards that we have to talk about why the police department is against this and why we're not supportive of this, and then we proceed from there. And also, I'd like to read a letter from a good friend of mine and state senator who's in support of this, who raised some interesting points, Senator Joyce Elliott.
Well, we'll go see what we have. I mean, if there's a motion you wish to make along the way, let me know.
So
we've got about we got 11 or 12 cards that wish to speak on this item. So, first of all, we have to have a reading of the ordinance. So, Madam Clerk, if you would, first reading of ordinance number 16, please.
An ordinance to declare it the policy of the City of Little Rock, Arkansas, to make investigation, citation, arrest, or seizure of misdemeanor marijuana offenses by adults the lowest law enforcement priority, and for other purposes, first reading.
Is there a motion to suspend the rules and place this on second reading? There's a motion and a second to suspend the rules and place this ordinance on second reading. All in favor indicate by saying aye. Opposed, say nay. Second reading, please.
An ordinance to declare the policy of the City of Little Rock, Arkansas, to make investigation, citation, arrest, or seizure of misdemeanor marijuana offensive by adults the lowest law enforcement priority, second reading.
We'll suspend the rule, place on third and final reading.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to suspend the rules and place this ordinance on third and final reading. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Third and final reading, please.
An ordinance to declare it the policy of the City of Little Rock, Arkansas, to make investigation, citation, arrest, or seizure of misdemeanor marijuana offensive by adults the lowest law enforcement priority, third and final reading.
Okay, we've had the three readings of the ordinance, and Mr. Moore, if we could ask the chief to come forward, please.
Sure, Chief Buckner.
We have a full audience here, and some people may not have heard the chief's discussion on this earlier. So, Chief, if you would.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the board, as I stated earlier when we had the discussion at our previous meeting, we are in agreement with Director Richardson that misdemeanor possessions of marijuana should be a low priority. The reason that we are in agreement with that is because given the challenges that we face day to day in our city, something that minor cannot be a priority for us. One of the key reasons that it already is a low priority for us is we have very limited jail space. There are 1,210 spaces in the Pulaski County Jail. We share that with our other partners in the Pulaski County, and also with state prisoners, uses maybe 300 to 400 folks from state prisons that are there waiting to go to penitentiary, and then about 75 to 80 folks who are waiting to go to the federal penitentiary. So that cuts down significantly the number of beds that the rest of the departments have to be able to utilize that. Because of that, there are no individuals going to jail for misdemeanor marijuana. And if they are, it's not the sole charge that they were charged with. What I mean by that, you cannot have a joint or a small bag of marijuana in our city and you spend the night in jail. It's just not going to happen. You have a nonviolent felony in our city. Because of limited jail space, you're not spending the night in jail, which is some of the frustration that you all see for some of the things that are going on in our city. Example, so when we look at Ms. Sheila Miles came up here tonight and she spoke to you about the Wright Avenue area. She talked about drugs and prostitution. One of the reasons that she's frustrated with that is because prostitution is a nonviolent misdemeanor offense. So she watches us come into her neighborhood, we do a detail, cite these prostitutes, and then they walk down the street. Same thing with the misdemeanor marijuana offenses. Cite the individuals, they walk down the street. Now, in practice, we're already doing what the ordinance is calling for. By force, we don't have a choice because we don't have the bed space for it. The reason that we oppose the ordinance to that is because I don't want to create this lax atmosphere that everything is kind of open and just kind of do whatever you want to do in Little Rock. Let's use it again because we have a recent example. So take the challenges that you all have heard about. And Mary, you said that we've had documented challenges in the Wright Avenue area. And I'm only using that for an example because it was the most recent before you. Think of just an atmosphere to where people feel like that they can stand out in front of that same store, smoke weed, nothing's going to happen to them. People are coming through the area, residents who don't want to be bothered with that kind of stuff that are already having challenges. So don't think of the areas that don't have some of the challenges that come before you today. Think of the areas that are already challenged today, and then we create this atmosphere that you just do whatever you want to do. I think that's bad news. I do think that it should be a low priority. It is a low priority for us in practice because we have nowhere to take these individuals. I do understand that one of the other issues that Director Richardson raised was that he felt like that there was a disproportionate number of African-American males that were having these marijuana citations and these arrests. That's based upon the number of contacts that we're having with people. And if you look at crime in our city, more often than not, it's happening in the areas where people of color are there with poverty and a bunch of other socioeconomical issues that are going on. But we think this is a bad idea. We think it sends a bad message. We think the optics is bad. We think that our city should not be subscribing to something like this when many of the complaints that you receive in your mailboxes that they're complaining about things that you all send to me consistently involve drugs. And I think just sending a message that that this is okay or this is something that we're just going to drive by and not do anything, I think it just sends a bad message in our city.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Director Richardson, did you have a question for the Chief?
Yes, just a couple of comments, Chief. Just quick question. Will our officers still be able to make misdemeanor arrests under this ordinance? And here's what's interesting to me. We say we do this in practice. Why do we have a problem with putting it as a policy? Because in practice, it's discretionary. Officer, last week, I think I asked you, can someone say the wrong thing and get arrested? You said, yeah, they can say the wrong thing and get arrested. I said, well, they can look the wrong way and get arrested as well. Mm-hmm. So to me, and the conviction rate also is related to someone's ability or inability to have private legal representation, which could help impact the conviction rate. I think it has a real deleterious impact on conviction rate. So I'm really I'm having this cognitive dissonance. If we're doing it in practice, why do we have a problem with putting it as a policy?
Because I think the things that
And it's not I'm sorry, Chief. We're not, let's make this clear. We're not decriminalizing, we're not legalizing it, I'm not encouraging it. I'm talking about how we utilize our resources, given the fact that we have a number of vacancies on the police department, we have concerns about violent crime in our community, we have a whole host of issues that to me are far more serious than simple misdemeanor possession.
Well, and it's a great question. And the example that I gave last time, when you talk about some of the benefits that we have to where misdemeanor marijuana leads to significant arrest for other things. So if we have the ordinance that you're saying that should be in place to where it's something that gives the officer a directive that this is a low priority, and because we're already doing it in practice and you don't think that they need the latitude to do that, I think our officers deserve the discretion to be able to know that when I see misdemeanor marijuana on a traffic stop, and I can smell that odor coming from the vehicle, the common thing that's going to happen is the individual, if they're experienced at dealing with, particularly with police officers, the first thing they're going to do is hand you that marijuana out the window. Officer, this is all I got. Sorry about the inconvenience for it. Please give me my citation and I'll be out of your hair.
But the ordinance the ordinance doesn't limit it to that.
But the ordinance says that we make it a low priority. So what do I go to that officer and say? So you shouldn't have went any further?
The same way some people get randomly stopped and searched.
So what's my question to the officer who goes beyond that initial bag of marijuana, that you went beyond that and you also searched that vehicle? So what do I ask the officer? And who determines if it was a low priority for that incident? You know who should do that? The individual officer who made that traffic stop needs to determine when this is all I got, we back out, you get a citation.
But we're doing it already. Well, I keep hearing you say we're doing this already. So
Yes,
how
sir.
does this ordinance impact our ability or inability to do it? If we're doing it already, what's the problem with putting it in writing and making it an official policy? Because discretion depends on what the officer look like and who the person he pulling over looks like. It's true. I mean, that discretion, and it's been proof positive that that's happened, and it's had a disproportionate impact on African American males of color, black males and black females, poor black males and females, because if they don't have resources for private representation, the public defender almost always, to limit the amount of work they have to do, almost always says, take this deal. So you have those conviction rates higher, and then the unintended consequences we have, if you get the conviction, you lose your Pell Grant.
Right, yes, sir.
If you get a multiple conviction, you end up having trouble getting employment, keeping employment, and unlike the 90s, when I see a number of people in this room who worked out in the streets doing gang intervention prevention work, unlike the 90s, the violence we're seeing right now is not gang-related. It is not. Now, it may devolve into some group conflict, but that's not the source of the conflict, unlike the 90s. So I think that Chief, there are a number of people here who I think I'm still having difficulty trying to figure out why, if we're already doing it, why do we have a problem putting it in practice?
Again, I will reiterate. I don't want to give the perception that this city is wide open to any and everything. I don't want to take that discretion from the officers to where they have to answer a question as to why you went to another level with a stop concerning marijuana. I also certainly understand that there are a number of people in our community and across the country that believe that police disproportionately impact people of color, and I think that there's data that will probably show that. Sure. I will also tell you that African Americans and Hispanic community call the police more than anyone else. They're also disproportionately victims of crime, which is data that often is left out of these conversations. So we certainly always have opportunities for improvement. I think though that if you go and look and you see that who was arrested or who was cited involving misdemeanor marijuana, I respectfully challenge you to find someone who has spent the night in jail solely charged for misdemeanor marijuana.
I don't want, I'm never one to be confrontational with you, but I'm looking at a young lady in the audience tonight whose daughter, 2 weeks ago, she was sentenced to 14 days in the county jail. And you know what? It wasn't for a firearm. It wasn't for aggravated assault. It's for a dirty urine test. Dirty urine test. She spent 14 days.
On probation.
Well,
Sir,
she
when
wasn't
you-
on probation, man. I know the young lady. No, don't do that.
When you
She
say
wasn't-
violated probation, then
she
it
wasn't, I
means-
didn't say that. The mayor said that.
So what kind of dirty? Where did the dirty urine come from?
Came from her job. She had a urine test, and she was sentenced to 14 days, Mayor.
Job puts you in jail for 14 days for dirty urine. Is what you're saying?
Okay, let's. I think that.
That makes sense.
I think we've tried to answer the questions from the presentation, and I think that's important to address those particular points.
But this ordinance doesn't impact the prosecuting attorney's office.
Yes, sir.
It doesn't at all, and it doesn't relate to or affect. It doesn't encourage. And you said perception. I mean, we have perception on different things, on different issues, different matters, and I don't think for one to say that this encourages or creates a perception that everything is wide open here. Much like I don't agree that 1957 defines Little Rock, the perception. If we're talking about reality, we're talking about something in practice. And I also, before we go any further,
Yes,
I've spent more time, Chief, than I wanted to talk, and
Understood.
I don't want to ask you a lot of questions. But I do want to read a letter, Mayor, with your permission, from a good friend of ours.
From who?
From a good friend of ours, a senator, state senator. And what's going to be challenging for me is yes, sir. What's going to be challenging for me, Mayor, is to be as articulate and melodic and as she would be, and to even refer to me in this letter that she wrote for us and to us in support.
Do you have a copy to distribute to the board?
Laura is out. I asked Laura to print some copies out. Bruce told me Laura is sick, so I did send it to Laura, and it can be sent to you guys. I can email it to you to verify.
You want to read it at this time?
Yes, sir, I do.
All right, go ahead.
The mayor, as member of the board of directors, I am submitting this letter in support of the proposed ordinance by Director Ken Richardson to deprioritize misdemeanor offenses involving marijuana. Please be clear. This is not a position I take lightly or one to which I have not given considerable thought for several years. This ordinance is rooted in the obligation that when we know better, we do better. We now know that the so-called war on drugs is a failure strong with what I pray is unintended collateral damage that has had lasting negative impact on the lives of individuals, families, and neighborhoods. Chief among them, but not limited to, my consideration is disparate racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic impact this presents on our practices and our laws that they've had. I accept that such laws and enforcement were well-intentioned, but the evidence is clear. The evidence is clear that those good intentions have not resulted in the outcomes that outweigh the merits of passing this ordinance, because we know better. In the spirit, during the 2017 General Assembly, once again, this is Senator Elliott, I offered SB 237 to require racial impact statements under the certain conditions that we pass as legislators or how we change laws. The measure passed the Senate, but unfortunately, it failed in the House. But fortunately, via this ordinance, we have the opportunity to do better in our city. It has been suggested that Director Richardson is not needed because the reference offenses have already treated as proposed. In that case, I'm very encouraged you will put into the law, which is purportedly, it's hard for me to read this in third person, purportedly practiced. Why is that important? Reciprocal communication between the police and the community is not enough if none of us can pull up the law and read it. Such omissions can lead to confusion and a lack of trust for no good reason, which is some of the things we have in parts of our community with our police. Finally, I thank you for your service, to you guys, to the people of the city, and for hearing me. I respectfully ask that you vote favorably on this ordinance, one that I think will be helpful in restoring and rebuilding the human capital in our homes and our neighborhoods, therefore our city. Sincerely, Joyce Elliott, State Senator, District 31. And with that, Mayor, I'm through.
Okay, thank you. All right, we have cars that wish to speak on this matter. Shalonda Michelle is the first card I've got on the top.
I'm not in any way advocating for anyone to smoke marijuana. However, due to the underserved people who are being affected by this ordinance needs to be passed. I think it's more of a racial inequality issue more than the issue of saying let's do marijuana or allow it, if that makes sense. So I think that's the point that we're trying to make, because if anybody knows me, I'm going to say no smoking anything. However, when you're looking at the number of African American males being incarcerated because of this, or if they have 2 ounces or 3 ounces on them, that's not fair. That's not fair, especially when they're living in communities where it's difficult for them to get employment, difficult for them to stay in school. That's not fair.
Glenn McCracken.
Hey, my name is Glenn McCracken, and I'm just going to offer a personal testimony. My story is that I was one of the people affected by misdemeanor marijuana cases. I was arrested by a blunt roach that was thrown back that my brother threw to me and was just like, hey, you hold this. And man, I smoked that, and it was about probably my 10th time to do that. And he just threw it back to me, and I held it. And man, our car got searched for about 2 hours, and they finally pulled me out of the back after searching the front and asked me to empty my pockets. I just handed him the blunt roach, and I was booked that night. It was the first time that I was ever just asked to be undressed in front of people. It was the first time that I slept on a concrete floor. It was the first time that it was the first time that I woke up in a cafeteria setting to alarms going off, or like big whistles going off and lights going off and people stuttering out. It was the first time that I saw somebody raped with a shampoo bottle that weekend. It was the first time that I had been convicted of a battery charge for a fight that I got in while I was in jail. That then led to a probation charge, that then led to weekends in jail because I was doing a good job in other areas of my life. And man, if something different would have happened with that blunt roach, if I hadn't have been smoking, of course I know, that all these kind of things could have happened, but what I can't unsee is the things that I did see as a result of that. What I can't undo are the ways that I continued to hurt people later on as a result of my choice to survive in jail on the weekends. You just join a gang, and that's just what you have to do. And it's a weird thing to say. I guess I'm still in that gang now because you can't get jumped out or whatever that situation is. But I'm a business owner in the city. Today I work with youth. I'm a licensed professional counselor in this city, and I promote health and wellness to adolescents and to people who have had situations similar to mine. And I would really just prefer to see this thing and to hear the incongruence of the police force practicing it but not really saying that that's what they're practicing. That's called lying. It's called being,
Let's have some order, please. This is not a popularity contest. We're just trying to understand the information that people are willing to impart to us.
And, my hope is I definitely have opened my eyes to some of the social injustice issues of the African American population versus the white population, and I'm just thought it was important to be here today as a voice of someone who has experienced this, as someone who has recovered from this and is starting to give back to my city. I don't see it. I was a part of it in Fayetteville whenever it started to go there, and I definitely don't think of cities who have similar policies as this as like, man, I can't take my kids there. I think of it as places that are adapting and evolving to common problems and understandings that there are better treatment methods, better prevention methods that are available in today's time that are inconsistent with the policies that are in place from whenever time was there. And I think Little Rock specifically, Pulaski County specifically, has a responsibility to be a leader in our state. It's often frustrating that whenever I come back to Central Arkansas, that I face more racism, more socioeconomic stress than I do in Northwest Arkansas. And it's just, I guess it's just a shame, and I just want better for our city, and thanks for listening.
Glenn, these incidences that you mentioned in the jail, did you report those to the Pulaski County Jail and to the sheriff?
Man, so, you know, I was one of about 6 people who witnessed a person get raped with a shampoo bottle.
Was this at the Pulaski County Jail?
No, this was in Faulkner County.
Oh, I thought maybe it might not be Pulaski County Jail, so this was not Pulaski County. Is that correct?
Correct.
No, I'm just asking.
Yeah, no,
All right.
you're
So this
100%.
was Faulkner County, it was not Pulaski County.
You're still correct.
Do you get arrested by the Faulkner County Sheriff's Office or the Conway Police Department? Was that the arresting authority?
It was the Conway Police Department.
Okay. Thank you. That's all the questions I have for you.
Oh,
Thank you. Johnny Hassan.
Thank you again. When you cut me off, the number one question I wanted to present was that what is the resolution rate of the homicides in the city of Little Rock is less than 40%, okay? And that's my question. That was the other part. So back to the issue of the ordinance that we're talking about. We have a punitive system of treating human beings. And our Trump said, execute drug dealers and drug offenders. And the pharmaceutical people, your documents show that they are the biggest drug dealers. Now, this policy has more to do with humanizing our people who have a medical and social addiction. Okay, marijuana is no more critical than your common cigarette. Okay, and you choose to criminalize marijuana versus cigarette. That's your choice. Now, the point of it is that when you criminalize this particular thing, just like you did prohibition in the 30s, making alcohol a criminal issue, you create a criminal enterprise. And that's what you want to do. The brother is right. For him, the police chief said that you would not go to jail for a misdemeanor citation is a lie. Straight up. Because I've been to jail for a misdemeanor citation given by your Little Rock Police Department because I observed a young man being searched, car search, and so forth, doing a few years ago. And John Walker, the same thing happened to him. Those are documented situations. And I also witnessed a situation on Wright Avenue at K Hall. A young man, car search. Well, no, they didn't search his car, but 3 police officers, and I asked the mayor, Bruce Moore, about this. K Hall didn't report it to Bruce Moore because probably his wife works for Bruce Moore. So the point of it is that the housing issue, the young people would not be able to get a citation. When a citation is FOI, and so the housing people, they don't have to allow you to get a house because you have a criminal citation, not conviction. Notice that there's a difference between conviction and citation. So when the police chief arrests you, you get the citation. That's public information. Is that not right? And anybody and so forth. The other issues, you're not offering any drug treatment options. Because if that was the case, I would suggest that we add into the scenario, if you're going to arrest them, allow drug treatment, just like we're trying to do with mental health. There's an opportunity for them to go into a drug treatment program or somewhere where they can get help. So my point is that if we don't humanize what we're doing instead of criminalize what we're doing, then we're going to have more and more consequences of our young people, eventually coming into a society that we have no neighbors. We become a friend, a community, non-neighbors. And we end up with a police force that is occupying us rather than being neighbors, because you have majority of the police living outside the county, okay, outside the city of Little Rock, and therefore when they come in, they have no relationship with them. So that means what? That means that ordinance you're talking about is discretionary, just like the police said. So it's discretionary based upon whose color, okay, whose neighborhood you come from, and what community you belong to. So that discretion is what he's asking to take away, to not allow that kind of discretion make it law. Thank you.
You have a question for Mr. Hassan?
Yes, sir. You had one for the young man prior to him. Johnny Hassan, how many years have you been providing drug use and abuse treatment in the city of Little Rock?
Okay, I worked basically 12 years, Arkansas Department of Correction, working with inmates and so forth, doing my early years in prison ministry. I also worked with federal prison, working with people with drug problems, drug related. I also worked, the founding member was a member with the Gene Irvin, when Gene Irvin established the, at the Urban League, established the treatment alternative street kind. That was in the 90s, okay? Then I worked for the GIS House, when Gene Gibbons was living. So the issue is that the criminalization of marijuana, to me, is our own inability to humanize an addiction, okay? And so, yeah, I've been a volunteer in the prisons, but I also understand that as a user myself, okay, statute of limitations out, that the issue of that is that you do not have the criminality that's really involved in marijuana as you do have in those other drug issues. And so my thing, as Ken said, he's not reporting that, but my point is also I would believe and go for decriminalization, which is a step further. Thank you for the question.
Sir. But the one question, because I haven't done some work in the community before my agency was shut down with you, would you say the total number of years that you spent doing the kind of work that you described would exceed 25?
Oh yeah, I'm
Probably
that old.
even 30.
I'm that old, yes.
Thank you, my
but
brother.
yeah, like I said, the GIS House is still existing, okay? And the Urban League was the one who established the treatment alternative street crime that Bill Clinton established back in the early days, and the Republicans gutted when Frank White came in. This politics was disinformation, Mayor. And so again, my point is that there should be an option. If the treatment option should be there, if in fact you're going to criminalize the individuals who possess marijuana. Okay?
Thank you, sir. And thank you, the young man who spoke previous to you. Thank you, sir. You did a wonderful job. I got your point. Man, I'm trying to be nice tonight. I got your point, whether it's in Faulkner County or Pulaski County, and thank you for sharing your story with us.
Okay, Marvin Spencer. Marvin Spencer. Okay. Sabur Salam.
First of all, to the board and everyone, I want to first of all do two things. I want to give a greeting from the Muslim community in Arkansas and Little Rock of Ramadan Mubarak. Muslims of all over the world, here in Little Rock and all across the state, are celebrating Ramadan, which is a fast. We're fasting so we can have more compassion for individuals. So that's why I'm here, to show compassion for individuals while I'm fasting. And look at Mayor, we got to get out of here, because look, I'm fasting and I'm hungry. I was supposed to break my fast at 8:10, my brother, you know, and I ain't had a peanut all day. So it's time, okay? First of all, my name is Sabur Salam. And once again, I want to say, wish everyone a blessed month of fasting from the Muslim community in Little Rock and across the state and the world. I'm here representing the Order 16. My position is that I'm a drug and alcohol counselor, and I'm a former drug addict. I am supportive of this because of the fact, first of all, we have to look at what we do here as individuals, as a community, as organizations. We have to look at the past, the present, and the future. As we see in the past, that we've put up quite a few people in prison for substance abuse issues, drug and alcohol issues, and I was one of them. In the present, we're doing the same thing. But the present has changed a little bit, because now the state has approved medical marijuana. That puts a whole other twist in it. That is not saying, the state has already said it's wide open. If you all don't think it's wide open now, it's wide open now. And so what are we going to do about it? In the future, it's even going to be more wide open when they get dispensaries and all the cultivation sites in. It's going to be more wide open. We need to look at the issue not only in impoverished communities, the opium epidemic on TV, I ain't seen one African American. Now, that's what I've seen. They ain't promoted one African American overdose. But I looked at the statistics. There was about 23,000 people, may God forgive them in the sins and grant them the paradise, that died of opiate addiction in 2016. Of that number, there were only 274 people of color. 2,000 people of color. Now, why am I saying that? This is not only going to, this ordinance is not only improperly affect African American community, but it's going to affect all communities. We have to be considered that in the future, people are going to be riding, smoking weed, or whatever they're going to do. What are we going to do? Well, like the young man said, if you get in trouble, what do? I don't support riding around smoking weed. I don't support that. I don't support, putting people in jeopardy, in prison or jail. But we need to, yes, give a citation that won't possibly go on the record. Also, if you get stopped smoking marijuana or whatever, you have some type of treatment modality that you have to go to. And once you complete that, or once you go through that, just like drunk driving classes, maybe it won't be on your record, okay? We have to do that, because putting those things on people's record, even though I got my record expunged, I still couldn't get a job as a fireman. I passed the test. That was 40 years ago. I passed the test, every test. Because of my record, I couldn't get a job as a uniformed civil servant. That would be the same effect if I got busted today with marijuana for simple possession. It would affect my job opportunity if I was looking for a job. So we have to look at that in retrospect, and look at that in the future retrospect also. That we're going to have more of that going on, because it's going to be legal for medical marijuana. And if people are smoking medical marijuana and they got a pain, they have an issue, just like if I was taking aspirin or a BC in my car, and I get stopped in my car. If I have a medical marijuana card, what happens? Or if I don't have a medical marijuana card, what happens? So we have to take that in consideration. So I am supportive of this. I think that we have to look at what other cities have done, and I support what the gentleman said, that our capital city should be a leader in this, because the people have spoken that they want medical marijuana, and medical marijuana is here. It's been here in the past, present, and it's going to be here in the future because it's legal now. Basically, it's going to be legal for medical. So we must try to identify ways to, once again, when you stop, make it a lower priority. But not only make it a lower priority, but also have the individuals who stop go to some type of classes about drug abuse and drug use. I pray God's peace be with you. Thank you so much. And I got to go eat God's peace.
Rachel Bournet.
Okay, I'm going to make this as concise as possible. My name is Rachel Bournet, and I'm a member of the Racial and Cultural Diversity Commission. I'm also a resident of Ward 3 and an engaged citizen who cares about what's going on in my community. And I'm here to speak on behalf of the Racial and Cultural Diversity Commission in favor of this ordinance. First, I want to make a full disclosure that I work for Our House and I manage our reentry program. And so that means that I serve people who have criminal convictions. I'm not speaking on behalf of Our House tonight. However, I will use my day-to-day experience to bring forth some evidence about how any criminal charge on a person's background, even a low-level misdemeanor arrest, can have huge impacts on the rest of their life and their ability to access housing, employment, education, and their ability to have a life that's free of fees and fines and community supervision. Just today, I met with a client who was denied access to housing, not because of a marijuana arrest, but in seeing the reason that he was denied, I was given access to the policy of the property management firm of Buffington Towers, which is given funding by the Housing and Urban Development Department. I'm now going to read from this. So, the agent has established standards that prohibit admission of A, B, C, D, E, F, a record of any conviction or settlement other than acquittal for any misdemeanor within 2 years of conviction. So this is a great example of even if a person receives a misdemeanor charge, they could be excluded from accessing housing, including housing that is funded by the federal government for up to 2 years. So I believe that waiting period could give birth to other criminal involvement, homelessness, instability for a family, etc. I also want to talk about employment. So since I started my job, I've worked directly with over 1,000 people who are largely seeking assistance with employment. And yes, it's true that if you have a misdemeanor charge, you can probably get a job, full stop. You can probably get a job, but your ability to access employment at above minimum wage is very difficult. So I'm going to give 2 examples. I have the rules and regulations for gaining employment with a long-term care facility. So if someone wanted to be a CNA, a physician's assistant, they would be disqualified for any misdemeanor conviction that was within 5 years of their application for that job. Okay, the same rule applies for the licensing requirement to work in a licensed daycare facility. So if you wanted to work in childcare, you wouldn't be able to do that until 5 years had passed from gaining a misdemeanor charge. I also want to talk about education. Director Richardson has mentioned this. It is true that if you receive a drug conviction while you are a recipient of federal student aid, then it can be suspended and you might lose your eligibility to reapply, and you might be liable for returning any of the financial aid that you received up until you caught the charge. And then finally, I think this is the most important thing, is any person that engages with the court system, whether or not they get a conviction, they're going to have to pay court costs. And in a brief conversation with the court clerk at the Little Rock District Court yesterday, she kind of itemized what those court costs involve, and I've got a docket sheet right here. And so $385 is pretty much the standard for someone who engages with the court system, and that includes a county jail fine, a city jail fine, a drug crime special assessment, criminal court costs, and a booking fee. And I think that's just the start of it. You're going to hear from Omavi in a little bit, and he was able to pull a lot of these docket sheets that describe the debts that a person can get themselves into just by being involved with the court system. The statute for this law in Arkansas, so this is the misdemeanor offense in question, possession of a controlled substance, Schedule 4, less than 4 ounces. That's what we're talking about here. I've got the code right here. And for your first 2 offenses, catching that charge is punishable with up to 1 year in jail and up to $2,500 in fees and fines. What makes our laws in Arkansas particularly draconian is that upon your 3rd time being caught with less than 4 ounces of a Schedule 4 substance, you are charged with a Class D felony. And so we move out of the penalties for misdemeanor territory, and we move into the felony penalties, which are much more severe, which are punishable up to 6 years in prison and $6,000 in fines. And so I agree that it's not that common for someone to spend weeks in jail for a petty misdemeanor conviction of possession, but I also believe wholeheartedly that catching a charge has huge impacts on a person's life. I also want to mention the fact that I, through my capacity in my job, work closely with the city's reentry office. We receive, last year I think I received 275 referrals from the city. So there are tons of people in this community who are seeking help because of the barriers they face because of a criminal record. And I believe, and I can speak for the Racial and Cultural Diversity Commission in saying that one of the best ways to address this issue of reentry is to limit people's involvement with the criminal justice system to begin with. So, thank you.
Director Wright, just a second. Rachel?
Rachel.
If you will come back, please.
I have a question, and it may be for Mr. Carpenter, or it may be for you, Mayor. You mentioned the laws several times. Now, these are state laws, right?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Carpenter, is it in our purview to change state laws? Can we even do that?
No, you can't change state law, but that's not what the ordinance does. It's a policy statement that we find this something we don't wish to enforce, like
jaywalking.
And we have that option on any.
Well, you're only stating a policy. There's no penalty if there's a violation, but you're stating what your policy is and what you think is the appropriate thing to do.
So this wouldn't run us afoul of the law. Okay. I just wanted to be clear.
Sure. Thanks.
Director Adcock, do you have a question?
You twice said that Culture Racial Commission, did they vote on this to support this?
In our commission meeting, yes.
It was voted on in your commission meeting for them to support this.
I believe. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Director Richardson, do you have a question for Rachel?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. In your Cultural Diversity Commission, did you guys vote on this?
Yes.
You guys voted to approve this, and you guys do document your meeting. You have minutes from your meetings, and this was an official position. And given that question, would you guys be willing to put that support or that vote in the form of a letter and or email?
Well, I think we've got a number of our representatives here. Can I open it up to them to ask if they'd be willing to do that?
I think we can talk about this.
Sure.
I appreciate your comments, wonderful comments, but I do know this is an issue. As a board liaison, along with my good friend, Director Peck, the board liaison to the RCDC, I think that we can certainly verify the fact that some action and discussion has been taken on this.
Sure,
and
and
not just at the spur of the moment, over time.
I also think it's worth noting, one, just to mention the mission of this commission, which is to realize goals of equity in all facets of our community, and to encourage or ensure that all of our residents have equal freedom to pursue their aspirations regardless of their race or their cultural background. And additionally, that this commission is part of the Department of Community Programs, which is the same department that houses the city's reentry office. So I think it's a natural connection.
Thank you for your service on the commission, and certainly thank you for your comments tonight and your work in assisting us with the reentry efforts, which is a big part of, a big source of the violence that we have in our community, our inability to fully fund it and fully implement the needs versus what the resources we're committing to it. I mean, there's a large number of disconnected adults and youth that we're trying to get them reconnected through our reentry program. So I want to thank you for your service on all those levels, and great comments tonight.
Thank you.
Director Wright, do you have a question for?
Not so much for Rachel, but I think
you,
it might be for the chief, because I recall asking this question last time we discussed this, and I didn't get any clarification, and that is on how exactly would we enforce this?
Well, can we get through the cards first,
Okay.
and then if there are other questions for the chief, we can get back to that.
Okay. Cool.
Camille Rochot. Camille, is there a Camille Rochot or Rochot here? She left, okay. Russ Raycop.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not going to repeat any of the things these folks have made. I like to use facts in my blogs and in my statements to the board, and I'm going to give you a little bit of facts here to counter some of the misrepresentations that the chief has made. This comes from a story in the Arkansas Democrat, Zet, back in 2016. Said, as of November 9th, Little Rock police have made 225 arrests in which misdemeanor marijuana possession is the only violation. That was a 95% increase compared to the number of arrests in 2012. And I believe Chief Buckner was here. He wasn't looking for a job at that time. The chief also has issues with medical marijuana. You know, he opposed that. In Pulaski County, there were 1,516 votes cast on the medical marijuana ballot. 92,529 voted for it. 62,487 voted against it. So you have a population of our county, which Little Rock is the largest metropolitan city in that county, that supported the medical marijuana measure. These offenses that come up with this, it's 4 ounces, above 4 ounces will get you a felony conviction. Now, I didn't have home economics in school, but my mother was a home economics teacher. 4 ounces is half a cup. Mr. Richardson, could you hold up that white paper cup you have there? That's probably a cup. Half of that will get you a felony conviction. I don't use marijuana. I don't advocate its use, but there are far less offenses that marijuana causes. We don't have, I would ask the chief how many people we've had arrested for DWI, wrecks, and arrest that marijuana, they've been high on marijuana. We see that with cars all the time, and our governor's son is on his 4th DWI arrest, and he'll spend less time in jail than these folks will here with this 4 ounces of marijuana. I think we're going to have to do these. If the chief has got this policy, just like he has with not giving tickets to officers, if you have that established policy and you're doing it, like Director Richardson says, what's wrong with putting it in writing? Are you embarrassed that you're doing it? It doesn't conflict with the laws and things like that out there. And I think it's the right thing to do for these citizens that we have in our city. If we're trying to lower crime and we're trying to make Little Rock a compassionate city, then I think you're going to have to show that you're going to do that by adopting this measure. Thank you.
All right, let's this is not a popularity contest. Okay, so can we avoid the applause? I mean, I know there are many supporters out there, and we recognize you and appreciate you, but let's try and keep it appropriate. Thank you. Omavi, do you have a question, Director Richardson? Oh.
Before Omavi comes up, Mayor, there's been a couple other issues we've had where we've had applause and we didn't call a point of order. I don't know if it's
we
the
did.
quality.
I did.
Or
I've tried a couple times, and people
Okay,
are apparently ignoring it. So.
I apologize for that if you did. I didn't hear it. Thank you, sir.
Okay, Amavi Shakur.
All right. Good night. So, first, I'd like to gladly accept the chief's challenge. He challenged us to identify anybody who spent time in jail pursuant to a misdemeanor marijuana offense alone. I have a stack of 20 examples, just a sampling of people who have been sentenced to incarceration in Pulaski County Jail just for marijuana offense, including one man who was sentenced to 300 days in jail. I have a copy for each of you if you would like. Challenge accepted. Again, marijuana arrests, it shot up 95% in 3 years. And what returns did we get for that increase? Did the chief show us, did anybody show us a decrease in marijuana use? No. Did they show us did violent crime decrease? No. Violent crime went up, right? Is it a coincidence that violent crime went up with the 95% in misdemeanor marijuana arrests when you hear the people that we pay to serve these populations say that the people cannot get jobs, people cannot get housing because of these marijuana arrests, right? And now we have a shortage of police officers. This isn't about decriminalizing marijuana offenses. It's not about that, right? This is about a police officer not spending time investigating solely a misdemeanor marijuana offense when there's a domestic violence call, right? When there's a property crime, right? This is about misplaced priorities, and all we're getting is empty results. We're not getting any results. Violent crime went up during this increase. And so what is the city going to do about it? This increase made our neighborhoods more dangerous. And again, we have people who are sentenced up to 10 months in jail, right, that you did not hear about. I'll give you a copy of all of these, just 20 examples. This is the least invasive means for you to address the misplaced priorities of the Little Rock Police Department, right? It does not prevent prosecutors from prosecuting misdemeanor marijuana offenses. It does not prevent law enforcement from making an arrest or investigating marijuana offenses. The chief and nobody can tell you how this ordinance prevents an officer who pulls somebody over and smells marijuana or sees marijuana from arresting said person. They can't say that because this ordinance does not prevent that, right? So the only way to bring some sort of argument against this ordinance is to read into it that which is not there, because there is no credible argument against this ordinance, right? It's in effect in Fayetteville. It's in effect in Eureka Springs, in Arkansas, and we're going to gladly lag behind the curve. That's what we'll be saying by voting no. So this is a test to see how responsive our city board is to its constituents. This is a chance for you to be heard, right? Are you going to ignore the hard proof that people do serve time in jail for misdemeanor marijuana offenses? Are you going to ignore the people that serve the population that are affected that you want to commit less crimes, that you want to have better economic outcomes? Are you going to ignore the people you pay to address these people head on? Are you going to ignore the people that live in the communities where these people are arrested? If you want to imagine a world where you can walk down the street smoking a joint with no sort of consequence, go out to West Little Rock. Right? When the chief talked about the where he doesn't want people all free and willy, he said Wright Avenue, right? Because that's where he's enforcing this. That's where the police are enforcing this, right? And it's sabotaging a population's employment opportunities. So this is opportunity for you to be heard, right? Again, so please be responsive to your constituents. Address this dramatic, problematic increase in arrest, and vote for this proposed ordinance, which the chief cannot identify any. This ordinance has been passed around the nation. The chief cannot identify any negative consequences that have come from this ordinance, this lowest law enforcement priority ordinance, in the state or outside of the state. Why can he not identify any negative consequences? Because there are no negative consequences, right? And so we have a city attorney that's saying it's legal. We have a chief and a prosecuting attorney that says that it's best for marijuana to be a low priority. And we have an opportunity for you to be heard and to reflect the voices of your constituents. And so you definitely will be heard after today. Thank you.
You're learning. Thank you. Do you have a question? Director Campiris, you're recognized, please.
I've got a question for you.
Yes.
I'm a little confused.
Yes.
Let me just see what you're saying to me and what I thought Ken said to us.
Sounds good.
Say that I'm in a car and I'm smoking marijuana and the police stop me. What do you propose they do if I've got less than 4 ounces?
So, and this ties into Director Wright's question about how this policy looks in practice. So one possible scenario is if there's no other violation at all besides misdemeanor possession of marijuana for adult use, right? If you're behind the wheel of a car and you're about to operate, if you're driving under the influence, right, then that's a whole nother scenario. So it's not the best example.
No. Just my question is, I've got it. I'm less than the 4 ounces that Mr. Rakoff talked about. Tell me what happens.
If you're driving under the influence, you should be arrested for driving under the influence.
I'm just saying that I've got it and the police stop me.
All right.
What do you propose they do?
If you have it and the police stop you, the police should confiscate it. They should cite you, issue a citation, and then let you go.
Okay.
Right?
And then what happens with that citation that they just talked about? That's on your record now.
Right. The citation is on your record, but again, it being a low law enforcement priority, so that
No. But everything everybody said tonight is the thing you don't want is something on your record, right?
Right.
So you're still saying that the police ought to say, Dean, you were sitting in the passenger seat. We stopped you for a broken light. You were smoking marijuana. We looked around. You just had some small amount. Here's a citation. So okay, now I've got a citation on my record.
Right. With all due respect, that's not a good example.
No.
Because I say this. We're talking about the investigation of misdemeanor marijuana offenses. So a better example would be somebody's walking down the street and you have reasonable suspicion that that person might be under the influence of marijuana. Now, whether or not you take further steps to investigate that person, that's a better example.
No. We're talking about you want the police to have discretion. No. Wait a minute.
Correct.
So I've been stopped.
Correct.
I've got less than whatever anybody's worried about.
Correct.
I now have a citation.
Correct.
On my record.
Correct. So I would, I will amend my answer. I would say the officer could also have in his discretion to let the person go, confiscate the marijuana, and let the person go as well.
So then the policeman then has the discretion of not abiding by the law.
Which the police exercise all the time. Every time you go in excess of 60 miles per hour in the freeway, there are a lot of police officers that exercise their discretion.
And that is
not
100%
to stop.
true. But
Right.
but all I'm saying is that you're talking about a controlled substance that you want the police to say, I'm not going to do something when I know it's there.
Respectfully, that's not in the ordinance. No, I am not talking about that. What I'm talking about.
But the ordinance says that you get the citation.
No, Director Computers, that's not in the ordinance. You can look at it. It's not in there. Just Director Richardson. I got it. Now, the ordinance says the investigation of misdemeanor marijuana offenses. So it's talking about police officers going out of their way, right, to investigate their suspicion of marijuana offenses when they could, in fact, be solving some of those unsolved murder offenses that
If confronted with the knowledge that that's what's going on, what are you going to have that policeman do?
So the police officer should take into consideration that the city has established that marijuana possession is the lowest law enforcement priority.
I think
if I can finish, if you would like, Director.
No, I want you to just tell me what you think the policeman's supposed to do.
Again, the police officer first, step number one, is the police officer taking into consideration that this is the lowest law enforcement priority. Step number two, Director, is that the police officer decide then either to issue a citation or to confiscate the drugs and not issue a citation, right? The police officer can make either of those.
So if he gets the citation, then what all the other people have talked about, the cascade occurs.
Correct.
Yeah, it does.
For the record, a citation will not come up on a criminal record.
Yeah, it does. Sure it does. No, a citation is in lieu of an arrest warrant, or a probable cause arrest, but it is a citation is just simply a person who's cited to court on this particular arrest. They don't go to the jail to be booked.
That's what I'm trying to get people to understand.
Yeah, you're right.
We're not talking.
The consequence of being convicted on a citation is the same as being booked on arrest.
But what I'm trying to get the board to understand, what the community respectfully is trying to get the board to understand, is that there's not a lot of people walking around holding joints, walking down the street. This increase, this 95% increase, I guarantee you, we have thousands of police reports if you want to look at them, do not consist of people walking around with joints in their hand down the street. They consist of police officers.
I didn't say that.
They consist of police officers going out of their way to investigate misdemeanor marijuana offenses, and 80% of the drug arrests in Little Rock is of people that look like me.
I don't argue with any of that. I'm not arguing anything. I'm just trying to get my knowledge that once you have, if you're stopping a 70-year-old man for marijuana, you get a citation, and that basically is you go to court date, right?
Yes.
Isn't that right, Mark?
That's correct.
And so for that reason, the police officers, right, for all the negative consequences that you've heard about, police officers shouldn't be bending backwards, going out of their way to increase the numbers 95% more over the next 4 years. I think you have a good point.
Let me tell you, I agree with most of the things you said, but I don't think that I can sit here and tell a police officer not to obey the laws that he's been sworn to do.
Director Computers, I was in your program, Arkansas Commitment. I was one of your interns, right? You taught me to go away, go to a fancy school, right, and read carefully and bring best practices back. I fulfilled that commitment. Dean Capuris, I read carefully. There's nothing in that ordinance that says a police officer should not follow any law or not enforce any law. So we cannot read into the ordinance that which is not there. The ordinance is the least invasive means of meeting this issue. That's why you have to read into it that which is not there to discredit it.
What the ordinance implies when I read it, and I appreciate this discussion with you, is that you want the police officer to say, I think that this is a low priority and I'm not going to worry about it, and either confiscate the drug, because once you get the citation, you're in the system. Isn't that right, Tom? I mean, it is absolutely, you're in the system. So what you're asking, what? It's on your record, and that's what I'm trying to get. I'm trying to, everybody, I think it would be wonderful every time you stop someone if there was a drug diversion program. I think it'd be wonderful to be able to sponge it. But that's not what you're saying. You're asking, unfortunately, to me, as one individual, that we put the police in the position where they have to make a decision like that. And I don't think that's a fair position for them.
Well, with all due respect, the chief got up here and told you that effectively he's already put them in that position, right? And you had none of these concerns with the chief, but when your constituents get up here and ask for it to effectuate the same thing, all of a sudden there's a concern.
What the chief said was, they're going to get cited one way or another. They're not going to spend time in jail because it's a low priority, and they're going to still end up in the same situation. Is that not right, Tom?
I'm going to say the chief said what he said is the best I can say on that. He said that I understood the chief to say that we don't go out of our way now to arrest people for this offense. But I didn't hear him say that if it's in our face, we're going to ignore it.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Director Richardson, do you have a question for Omavi? I mean, I've got other cards, so. No? All right. Director Hendricks, do you have a question for Omavi? Director Wright, do you have a question for Omavi? Well, I mean, I'm trying to let Omavi either have a seat or let him continue to try and answer questions that board members have. So, well, all right, I'll come back to you. You don't have a question for him? All right, Director Richardson, you've changed your mind. You have a question for him?
Yes. Marvy, so these documents suggest that we are occupying jail space with misdemeanor marijuana arrests.
So it's not unprecedented, no, for people to be sentenced to jail for misdemeanor marijuana offense.
That being the only charge, no other additional charge, no weapons, no other.
Everything in front of you are only convictions for misdemeanor marijuana arrest.
And it's just a small sample.
It's a sampling, yes.
May I call a question?
Well, all right. Well, then the question's been called. Is there a second to that?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. All in favor of calling the question indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. I believe the ayes have it. So we'll move on to a vote on this ordinance. If you're ready for that, we can go ahead and call for it. All in favor of the passage of the ordinance indicate by saying aye. Opposed, say nay. I believe the nays have it. Roll call is requested, Madam Clerk.
Director Hendricks? Director Richardson? Yes. Director Peck? Present. Director Hines? Director Wright? No. Director Wyrick? No. Director Campuris? No. Director Fortson?
No.
Director Adcock? No. Vice Mayor Webb? Yes. Director Peck, would you like to change your vote?
No. Present.
Okay. It is
By a vote of 6 to 2 to 1 present, the ordinance has failed. Thank you very much for your attention and for being here this evening. And for those people who signed up with cards, I apologize that the question was called. That's your opportunity to speak. Oh, that's why you're against calling the question? Yeah, I know, yeah, I agree. What?
A lot of attention deficit, learning disabilities, and all of that other stuff.
It's a state statute. Got to figure that out first. Okay, we can move on now to item 17. It's a public hearing. Let me go ahead and open up the public hearing and ask if there's anybody who wishes to speak about this resolution, dealing with the sources and uses of our CDBG funds and home funds. Anybody who wishes, let's have a little order, please. Anybody who wishes to speak either for or against resolution number 17? Seeing none, let me go ahead and close the public hearing and ask for a motion on the resolution. Is there a sec? Oh, go ahead and read it. I'm sorry. Apologize. I kind of said what it was, but go ahead.
A resolution to approve the sources and uses of the projected 2018 CDBG home and HOPWA funds for inclusion in the city's annual plan and for the purposes.
It's a resolution, so all we need is a motion to approve. There's a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. The resolution is approved. We can now move to go into executive session. Is there a motion to go into executive session?
So move.
There's a motion and a second to go into executive session for the purpose of appointment and for city manager review. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. We're in executive session. We'll be back sooner or later. Okay, I'd like to announce that we're back from our executive session, and we're back in open session. Let me announce some decisions that we made. First of all, I'd like to, as it relates to a vacancy on the Commission for Children, Youth, and Families, I would like to appoint Lisa Donovan to an at-large position. I need a confirmation. Is there a motion to confirm?
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. She is appointed. And on the Arkansas Arts Center, I would like to, I'm going to read all of these and ask for one motion on them. I would like to appoint to an unexpired term Miss Melanie Taylor. I'd like to appoint Stanley Hastings to a term. And I would like to appoint Mrs. Loran Thomas also to a first term. I'd like to reappoint Isabel Anthony to a second term. I'd like to reappoint Gordon Selaski to I'd like to reappoint him to a first full term, and I'd like to reappoint Patricia Wilson to a second term, and then I'd like to reappoint Mr. Merritt Dyke to a third term, inasmuch as he is the chair of the Arts Center and is helping to lead the renovation of the Arkansas Arts Center and the bond issue that we're about to proceed with. So with that said, is there a motion to confirm those appointments?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. They are confirmed. The other matter that we dealt with had to do with a review of the performance of our city manager. And we had a constructive, engaging discussion with Bruce about that and about some of the activities that we had this past year, as well as goals and aspirations for the future. And the board is quite satisfied with his performance, thinks he's done a fine job. And we would like to go ahead and give him a raise consistent with what our other employees received, which was not a lot of money last year, but it was a 1% raise. So is there a motion to provide for that? There's a second. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. That motion is approved. I believe that's all we have. There is a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Thank you. We're in adjournment.
99.
3 minutes to 12.